darkness was once the only constant, it pressed against the edges of existence, soft and endless, swallowing horizon and thought alike. In that vast night, long before the first city, a handful of figures huddled around a trembling flame. Their faces were small islands of light in an ocean of black. The fire was new to them, tamed lightning, breathing warmth instead of fear. Its glow painted the walls of the world with shadows that moved like memories just beginning to form. They did not yet have words for safety, but they felt it. Smoke curled into the air, slow and fragrant, carrying the scent of burning sap and bone. Around them the wind sighed through grass and hollow stones. Eyes gleamed in the dark beyond, patient and predatory, but the flame's heartbeat held the beasts at bay. In the crackle of wood, something deeper stirred, the first rhythm of belonging. Each spark mirrored a pulse, each ember a thought learning to remember itself. They had no names for each other, yet they were already bound. The one who fed the fire, the one who kept watch, the one who slept and dreamed they were parts of the same quiet promise. Survive together or vanish alone. When one flinched, all leaned closer. When one laughed, the sound softened the air. They spoke in breath and gesture, in the tilt of the head, the slow offering of food. Cooperation was not strategy, it was instinct, an inheritance older than any idea. Above them, the stars moved. They did not yet draw patterns across that black river, but they sensed meaning there. The shimmer of distant suns was proof that the sky, too, remembered light. The fire and the stars shared a secret language, one that spoke directly to the pulse of those who watched. Every flicker on earth echoed a shimmer above, and somewhere between those reflections, the first thought took shape. We are not alone in the dark. Fear lived beside them, but it was not their enemy. It sharpened their senses, taught them to listen. The rustle of reeds, the crack of a branch, the silence that suddenly thickened, these were not noises to dread, but messages to decode. The mind that could interpret the night would endure it. And so they learned to listen not just with ears but with skin, with the hairs that rose when danger crept near. In fear, awareness was born. In awareness, the first glimmer of mind. The flame burned low. They fed it again, carefully, reverently, as though tending something sacred. Perhaps they did not know that this act would echo across time, that every hearth, every candle, every spark struck against steel would be a descendant of this fragile light. In that moment, they simply wanted to see each other's faces a little longer. The reflection of the fire in another's eyes was proof of shared existence, of a warmth that could travel from body to body without words. The night deepened, and with it came wonder. What was this light that ate the darkness, and yet died so easily? What invisible breath sustained it? When it hissed and faltered, did some unseen spirit demand attention? The fire became mystery, and mystery became memory. They would carry that glow forward, in ash and in dream, passing it from generation to generation like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Beyond the circle of warmth lay the void, cold, silent, indifferent. But inside, within the fragile perimeter of flame, a story had begun. Not a spoken tale, but a rhythm of gestures, the shared silence of awe. The first storytellers were not speakers, they were watchers of light, learning how to shape meaning from flicker and shadow. Every spark was a question. Why are we here? Every sigh of smoke was an answer. Only the heart could hear. Long before we learned to speak, we already knew how to remember. The memory lived in warmth, in fear, in the way one human hand reached for another through the dark. It was a memory not written in symbols but in sensation, a code of survival etched into breath and bone. We have never fully forgotten it. Beneath the hum of our modern lives, beneath wires and screens, that same pulse still whispers, stay close, keep watch, feed the fire. As the dawn approached, the flame thinned to a red thread. The tribe watched the horizon turn from black to grey, unsure if the sun would return. When the first light spilled over the plain, the fire's glow seemed to dissolve into it, as though night and day were exchanging secrets. The people rose, leaving footprints that the wind soon erased. But something remained, an understanding that warmth could be made, that safety could be shared, that light could be summoned from emptiness. The ashes cooled, but memory did not. It drifted upward in faint grey ribbons, carrying the scent of beginnings. Somewhere within that smoke was the promise that would shape all of human time, that knowledge is born from darkness, and that survival begins with the courage to strike a spark. And as the embers faded, another question stirred in the stillness, quiet but insistent. What hidden force had taught these fragile beings to endure at all? Before laws, there was trust. Before reason, there was rhythm. Long before our ancestors carved symbols into stone or wrote promises onto parchment, they forged something quieter, an agreement that existed not in words, but in the space between them. It was an understanding carried in glances and gestures, in the small grace of shared fire and food. They had no need to define loyalty. It pulsed like a second heartbeat inside them, reminding each soul that survival was not an individual act, but a shared one. When the wind howled across the plains and predators circled the camp, they moved as one body. One listened, another watched, and another reached for a burning branch. Each movement was guided by a kind of unspoken music, a rhythm of life that no one had to learn because it was already written into the blood. It was not the language of words, but of awareness. The tightening of a hand, the tilt of a head, the echo of footsteps falling in time. They did not think of kindness as virtue. It was necessity. When one member weakened, others adjusted. When one child cried, all ears turned. This empathy was not chosen, it was instinct. A quiet inheritance shaped by hunger and fear. To be human was to feel the pulse of others as your own. In every shared meal, every silent nod, every unbroken circle of watchful eyes, the tribe kept itself alive. By day, they worked together as if guided by invisible strings. Some hunted, some gathered, some mended or prepared. The tasks were never owned, only performed. No one demanded fairness because fairness had not yet been lost. At dusk, they returned to the fire, where the air shimmered with smoke and memory. Their cooperation was not measured in words, but in presence, the comfort of knowing that someone's shadow always overlapped with your own. Around the fire, silence was not emptiness, it was understanding. The faint crackle of wood filled the spaces where language had not yet formed. They sat close enough to feel each other's warmth, but far enough to let thought breathe. A soft glance could replace 1,000 explanations. In the flicker of flame on another's face, they read emotion like weather. Fear, hunger, tenderness, resolve. They learned that to notice another's pain was to ensure your own endurance. Over time, these gestures became ritual. The passing of a torch, the rhythm of a chant, the quiet alignment of hands during rest, all were part of an unbroken code. Each small act said, without words, I see you. You are part of me. That recognition was their strength. When storms came or the hunt failed, it was not the strongest who survived, but the most connected, the ones who could sense despair before it broke the spirit, who could offer calm before panic spread like flame. Empathy was not weakness. It was a form of awareness that reached beyond the self. The tribe did not question whether to help. It simply happened, like breathing. When a mother died, her child was not abandoned. When an elder faltered, others shared their food. These instincts were not moral decisions, they were echoes of the deeper law. The one who saves another saves the self. What modern eyes might see as superstition was, in truth, a language of the body. The shared fear of the dark was a teacher. Every growl beyond the firelight reminded them how fragile they were and how much stronger they became together. The unknown was always near, and it was unity, not courage, that kept it at bay. Trust was not declared. It was enacted in every heartbeat that remained steady beside another. Even their songs, if they could be called that, were collective. A hum began, soft as a breath, rising and falling with the crackle of wood. The rhythm bound them in calm concentration, sinking breath and heart. Through rhythm, they remembered who they were. Before speech, they had already learned harmony. The lull of the night became a kind of covenant, a promise that as long as one voice continued, none were truly alone in the dark. And so, generation after generation, this unspoken pact endured. It flowed beneath every tribe, every gathering, every migration. It whispered beneath the evolution of words and tools, surviving in the instincts that still stir within us when we feel seen, or when silence feels safe between friends. Beneath our modern noise, the same rhythm beats on steady, patient, almost forgotten. The tribes did not survive because they conquered. They survived because they remembered each other. Their strength was not measured in muscle or weapon, but in how deeply they listened. Cooperation was not a strategy, it was an act of faith without belief, a ritual of existence itself. What they shared was not ownership, but awareness. And in that awareness, something sacred flickered, an understanding that the distance between two souls could vanish with a single gesture of trust. Long before reason divided us into selves, rhythm made us one. It was this invisible pulse, not strength or fear, that carried humanity through the dark and into dawn. What made us human enough to survive was never our power, it was our willingness to feel. The night began with warmth, but ended with silence. Rain crept in from the horizon, slow and whispering, its first drops hissing against the embers. The tribe drew closer, shielding the small flame that had kept them alive through the long hours of dark. Yet even their hands could not guard it forever. The wind arrived like a breath from some forgotten god, heavy with storm and memory. Sparks leapt, flared, and vanished. What had once been heartbeat and center became a dull red glow trembling on the edge of nothing. When the last flame sighed and went out, the darkness did not roar in victory. It simply settled. It folded around them, ancient and indifferent, as though reclaiming what had only been borrowed. For the first time in many nights, they felt how deep the night truly was. No shadows moved now. Without light, shadow itself ceased to exist. They could hear their own breath again, and the distant rhythm of rain on earth. Some wept softly, though they did not know why. Others sat unmoving, waiting for the miracle to return on its own. But the miracle stayed gone. The warmth that had seemed eternal had vanished as quickly as it was born. The tribe learned that memory, like flame, survives only if tended. Forgetfulness was not punishment, it was nature. Even the brightest light fades when no one remembers to feed it. They tried to summon it again, striking stones, blowing ash, murmuring the sounds that had once called fire from dry wood. But the stones were wet, the grass heavy, the air thick with water. Smoke rose and disappeared, teasing hope that never fully formed. Fatigue crept through the circle, and a quiet fear began to grow, not of the dark itself, but of losing what the light had meant. The fire had been proof of connection, the soft bond between warmth and life. Without it, they were only individuals again, separated by cold. Yet in the hush that followed, another kind of awareness emerged. They began to sense each other not by sight, but by breath. The rhythm of inhaling and exhaling became the new light, the invisible glow that stitched them together. A hand found another hand, and in that simple gesture, the memory of warmth returned, if only faintly. The body remembered what the fire had taught, that survival is not brightness, but nearness. Somewhere in the darkness, a child whispered the sound of crackling wood, mimicking what had been lost. The others listened. The mimicry was clumsy, but in it lived imagination, the power to keep what had vanished alive in thought. They began to hum, quietly, the way wind had hummed through flames. The hum spread around the circle, a fragile imitation of the old rhythm. For a moment, it almost felt as though the fire had never died. But imagination too can flicker. As dawn edged over the horizon, the hum faltered. Pale light revealed the blackened wood, the grey threads of smoke winding skyward like ghosts of memory. The tribe watched without speaking. They understood now that even miracles can be forgotten when neglected. How many other gifts, unseen and unnamed, had already vanished this same way? The instinct to listen, to trust, to wonder, had those too burned out in some unremembered storm? The narrator lingers on that question, drifting through the mind's quiet corridors. Every age loses something. Sometimes we know its name. More often, we only feel its absence, like a missing warmth in the room. The tribe's fire was the first teacher of that truth. They learned that loss does not always roar. It sometimes whispers, soft enough to be mistaken for peace. When they walked away from the ashes, they carried with them not the flame itself, but the need to protect whatever light remained next time. And so forgetting became part of remembering. The ashes were not waste. They were instruction. The tribe would learn to rebuild, to strike again, to guard what flickers in the night. But the echo of that first loss would stay buried deep in every future hand that kindled a spark. It would whisper through time. Some fires die not because they were weak, but because no one remembered to feed them. In that realization lies a quiet melancholy that still belongs to us. We, too, live among forgotten fires, instincts left to cool beneath the noise of progress, connection smothered beneath comfort. We chase brightness, but rarely tend the small, steady glow of understanding. The same darkness that waited beyond the tribe's circle waits still, not to punish, but to remind. As the storm drifted away and the sky cleared, the tribe gathered the cold embers in their palms. The ashes marked their skin, soft and grey, a sign of both failure and survival. They did not yet know that this gesture touching what had died was the beginning of renewal. From what is lost, something always learns to rise. The narrator's voice softens, almost a whisper now. The night withdraws, leaving only the scent of smoke and wet earth. Dawn's first light touches the horizon like a promise made again. The tribe begins to move, slow and deliberate, seeking dry wood, dry ground, another chance to begin. Their breath turns white in the chill air. Their eyes reflect the faint gold of morning. Behind them, the ashes cool, silent witnesses to the truth of all memory, that what fades can be rekindled, but never replaced. And somewhere between the dying night and the newborn day, the world pauses half in forgetting, half in hope, as humanity takes its first quiet step toward learning how to begin again. Fear was not always an enemy. Once, it was the quiet guardian that stood between life and extinction. It did not roar or paralyze, it whispered. In the long hush of the ancient world, where every sound held a consequence, fear was a teacher of listening. It sharpened breath, widened eyes, and tuned the body to the secret rhythms of survival. Every rustle in the tall grass, every shift of wind against skin, every scent that did not belong, these were messages, and the mind that listened could hear them before thought had even formed. In those first nights, fear was not panic. It was awareness made pure. The ancestors did not run from it. They moved with it, like dancers in the dark, guided by instincts we have almost forgotten. When danger prowled, their hearts did not race with dread, but with focus. The body aligned with the world, the senses, breath, and silence merging into one steady current. To survive was not to fight against fear, but to listen until it revealed its shape. Even in the safety of the fire's glow, that listening continued. The night was never trusted completely. The wise among them knew that silence itself could deceive, that stillness sometimes meant something was watching. They learned to live in harmony with uncertainty, to read the invisible. Fear was their sixth sense, a form of intelligence that spoke in the language of instinct. When a bird fled too suddenly, when the forest grew quiet, they understood. The world did not warn with words. It hummed, and they were fluent in that hum. But somewhere along the long road of civilization, that sacred conversation faltered. We no longer live by the listening mind. The same fear that once kept us alive now keeps us awake. It whispers still, but the messages are tangled no longer about the movement of predators, but of time, money, and expectations. It was meant to keep the body ready. Now it leaves the body restless. What once sharpened our focus now scatters it, chasing invisible threats across glowing screens and crowded thoughts. In the ancient dark, a sound meant something. In our modern light, everything sounds like danger. The hum of the refrigerator, the vibration of a phone, the endless murmur of voices and engines, each triggers the same old response, but with nowhere to go. The body prepares to flee, yet there is nothing to run from. The fire that once burned clean now smoulders, smoke filling the mind instead of the night sky. We once feared to live, now we fear to pause. The ancestors trembled before lions and storms, things with names and boundaries. We tremble before our own thoughts, which have neither. The old fear had purpose. It was sharp, bright, gone as soon as the danger passed. Ours lingers like mist, seeping into every breath. The body still remembers what fear is for, but the mind has forgotten how to release it. And so it loops, endlessly vigilant, guarding against imagined futures and invisible judgments. Still, if we listen closely, something of the old wisdom remains. That quickened heartbeat before an unknown sound, that sudden intuition that something is off, that quiet sense of warning before words can explain it, is the same pulse that once guided feet through forests and deserts. Fear itself has not betrayed us. We have simply stopped hearing what it's trying to say. It is not shouting danger, it is asking us to awaken, to notice what we ignore. Perhaps fear was never about survival alone. Perhaps it was the first form of consciousness, the body realizing it could be lost, and thus must learn to care. To feel fear was to recognize the value of life, to sense the delicate line between being and vanishing. Every creature that has ever lived has known this language, but only humans learn to make stories from it. We turned fear into myth, into gods of fire and flood, into rules and rituals meant to make the unknown bearable. And yet, for all our cleverness, the old truth remains unchanged. Fear unites awareness and humility. It reminds us that the world does not belong to us. It surrounds us, watches us, answers when we forget to listen. The modern heart still beats with the memory of that communion. When the city grows too loud and the screens too bright, we close our eyes and feel it again, the faint, ancient alertness that taught us how to be alive. Fear, in its purest form, was never about threat. It was about presence. The trembling before the unseen was not only warning, it was wonder. To be afraid was to acknowledge that life was larger than oneself. And when we stop fearing, completely and coldly, we lose that sense of scale. We grow numb to the vastness that once inspired reverence. The ancestors did not hide from fear. They bowed to it, learning its rhythm, moving with it until they found peace inside its pulse. Tonight, as the world hums with invisible noise, the mind still has that choice. To listen not for danger, but for meaning. To feel the old pulse rising beneath the static. Fear was the gift that taught us how to sense the unseen. And though we have dressed it in anxiety, disguised it with reason, its essence remains. An ancient intelligence asking us to wake up, to notice, to breathe, to be. If we could hear it again, as the first humans did, perhaps we would remember that the mind was not built to escape fear, but to understand it. For fear was not the enemy of life, it was its guardian, its quiet teacher, and the first voice the earth ever gave us. And that voice still waits, faint but patient, in the silence between heartbeats, asking, as it always has, not to be silenced, but to be heard. The ancient world was not seen, it was sensed. Before sight ruled, smell and sound were the first languages of life. To survive meant to breathe differently, to listen with the skin, to read the wind as if it carried messages. A shift in air pressure, a faint sweetness of rot, the echo of wings cutting through fog. These were signals, as vivid to the old mind as speeches to us. Every breath was a translation of the invisible world. At dusk, the tribe would pause in stillness, faces turned slightly to the wind. They did not yet have words for instinct, but they trusted the strange certainty that sometimes rose from nowhere, that pulse of knowing before reason arrived. A single rustle in the grass could hold more truth than 1,000 thoughts. Survival was a conversation between body and earth, spoken through nerves and muscle memory, an ancient dialogue carried by scent, silence, and vibration. The air itself was an archive. The nose was the oldest historian, collecting the chemistry of the world. Rain before it fell, blood before it spilled, fear before it showed. Even now, we carry those memories. The sudden unease at an unfamiliar odour, the comfort of smoke, the nostalgia in petrichor. The body does not forget, it only waits for us to notice. Your ancestors still whisper through your nerves. Each heartbeat, each shiver, is a syllable of that forgotten language. In that age, awareness was worship. The world did not reveal itself through logic, but through rhythm, the call of a bird signalling safety, the crack of a branch announcing presence. The humans who lived by listening were not superstitious. They were fluent in reality. Theirs was an intelligence of feeling, not of numbers, knowing without naming, reacting before reasoning. What we call intuition was once the highest form of knowledge. Sometimes, when the night was thick with fog and the stars veiled their faces, the tribe relied on this second sight, the quiet, knowing that guided their steps. They did not need to see the predator to sense its gaze. The air changed around danger, dense and charged. It pressed on the skin, urging the body to move before the mind could catch up. This was not magic. It was sensitivity, refined by countless generations who learned to hear the heartbeat of the earth. And yet, in the hush between dangers there was beauty too. The scent of rain was comfort, a promise that water would return. The musk of animal fur meant food. The smoke of burning grass meant warmth. Even decay had meaning. The cycle continuing, life transforming into life. The body recorded it all. It knew, long before thought existed, that everything was connected through breath. Each inhalation was communion. Each exhalation, offering. we still feel fragments of that ancient sense, a sudden chill in a crowded room, a gut feeling about a stranger's eyes, a moment of stillness before something happens, though we cannot explain why. Science calls it intuition, a shortcut of neurons predicting patterns from memory. But perhaps it is something older, the residue of countless lives that listened before we learned to think. The wisdom of survival never vanished. It only went quiet beneath the noise of our inventions. When a mother feels her child's fear before a word is spoken, when we sense danger in the absence of sound, when calm arrives without reason, it is the same inheritance, resurfacing. We are not cut off from our origins, we are echoes trying to remember the song. Beneath the hum of modern machines, the old frequencies still hum, faint but faithful. To listen to them is not regression, it is return. Close your eyes, and the ancient world still exists within you. The scent of smoke, the murmur of leaves, the soft tension before thunder, all are doorways into that deeper perception. It is there, waiting, beneath logic and language. The ancestors are not gone, they have simply become your senses. Their vigilance lives in your breath. Their awareness flickers in the muscles that tighten before you understand why. The body is the oldest instrument we possess, yet we've forgotten how to tune it. We drown its messages with thought, reason, and noise, mistaking stillness for idleness. But the old mind was never idle. It was attentive. It knew that silence was not emptiness, it was signal. It was the sound of everything speaking at once, softly enough for only the quiet to hear. Perhaps that is why the night still calms us. Beneath the hum of the present, we feel a familiar rhythm, not in the air, but inside. The same listening that once saved us still hums, urging awareness, not fear. It reminds us that life has always been about attunement, not control. And somewhere, deep inside, that instinct still stirs, urging us to listen again, to trust the invisible, to remember the language that was never spoken but always known. Before we learned to hunt, we were hunted. The first lessons of survival came not from triumph, but from pursuit. We learned courage not from safety, but from knowing we were never safe. The forest was not an enemy. Then it was a vast, indifferent theatre, where we were both audience and offering. Every shadow carried intention, every sound, the possibility of teeth. To live was to walk through danger without demanding it disappear. In that early world, the predator's presence shaped the rhythm of every day. The rustle in tall grass, the flash of eyes reflecting firelight, the sudden silence of birds, all were messages written in the language of danger. Yet, the humans of that age did not hate what stalked them. They understood, in their unspoken way, that these creatures were not villains, but reminders. The lion's roar was not a threat alone, it was also an instruction. Remember where you stand. The tribe learned humility through watching. They studied the quiet precision of the cat, the patience of the serpent, the pack's coordination beneath the moon. To survive, they imitated these masters of stillness. Fear became discipline. The trembling hand learned to steady, the racing breath to wait. Each encounter etched awareness deeper into the bloodline until instinct became memory, and memory became wisdom. There were nights when the fire burned low and the dark pressed close. Eyes gleamed beyond the circle of light, waiting. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The tribe did not scream or scatter. They listened to the predator's pacing, to the pattern of its hunger. They had come to know that terror wasted strength. The heart must stay quiet, even as death prowled inches away. In that silence, they found an odd peace, a stillness born from acceptance, the understanding that life was fragile, yet worthy of being lived fully within that fragility. Each hunt and each escape refined this strange intimacy. When a hunter fell, the others mourned not just the loss, but the reminder that the balance still held. No one ruled the wild. They shared it, briefly and precariously. Predators enforced the law of awareness, nothing taken without cost, nothing granted without risk. The tribe's stories, long before gods or kings, were filled not with conquest but with awe. The great beasts were teachers cloaked in teeth, demanding reverence through fear. From them, humans learned patience. The hunter who rushed died quickly. The one who waited became legend. They learned cooperation, two the same unity predators displayed when cornering prey. The wolves, the lions, the eagles, all moved as one thought divided into many bodies. Watching them, humans saw their reflection, a reminder that power alone could not protect, but connection might. Over time, fear ceased to be merely reaction. It became art, a perfect dance of distance and timing. To live was to be alert, yet calm to sense danger without letting it own the mind. The predator's gaze was a mirror, in which humanity saw both its weakness and potential. Courage was no longer the absence of fear, but the choice to move despite it. That lesson would echo through every age to come. Even now, that memory lingers in us. The tightening in the chest when we hear a sudden noise, the way silence can feel alive, watching. Our bodies remember the eyes that once followed us through the dark. They remember that the world was never guaranteed, that every dawn was earned. We call it anxiety now, but once it was awareness, our oldest inheritance. The predators themselves were never symbols of evil. They were thresholds. To face them was to glimpse the order beneath chaos, to see that danger and life were woven together. Without the shadow, there could be no firelight. Without the chase, there could be no evolution of thought, of courage, of meaning. The beasts did not teach cruelty, they taught proportion, showing us the scale of our own smallness against the enormity of the living world. The tribes learned to honor what they feared. They painted the shapes of their hunters on cave walls not as trophies, but as prayers. To draw a lion was to confess awe. To carve a serpent was to acknowledge wisdom in movement. In those images, fear became gratitude, the first spiritual act born from terror. The narrator lingers on that paradox, that survival was never about domination, but dialogue. Humanity endured because it listened to the growl in the dark, to the warning in wind and scent, to the rhythm of steps that mirrored its own heartbeat. The predators forced them to become aware, and awareness was the first spark of consciousness. Now, when the modern world feels too bright, too loud, the old fear sometimes stirs beneath the noise. It whispers of the time when danger was simple, when courage meant listening. And though we no longer see glowing eyes beyond the trees, we still carry their reflection in our blood. The predator fades, retreating into memory, but its lesson remains, that life was never promised, and that true strength begins not in safety, but in the quiet acceptance of our own fragility. One night, hunger met hunger, and loyalty was born. It began in the kind of cold that erases sound. The wind moved through the valley like a long sigh, and the snow carried no footprints yet. At the edge of the human camp, faint smoke rose from a fire struggling against the dark. Beyond its fragile glow, two pairs of eyes watched gold and unblinking. Wolves. Thin, patient, and driven by the same ache that gripped the people huddled around their dying flame. The hunters had failed again. Their arrows broke against ice-hardened hides, and their traps lay empty. The tribe was learning, painfully, that hunger is not just absence, it is awareness. It sharpens the air until every breath feels edged. That night, they smelled their fear as clearly as the wolves did. Somewhere in that shared scent, recognition stirred. They were not enemies. They were mirrors. The wolves crept closer, drawn by the smell of bones cracked open for marrow. The humans saw the shapes moving through the snow and reached for stones, for firebrands, and then stopped. There was no strength left to fight. One hunter tossed the bare remains of a carcass into the dark. A low growl answered, but it was not rage, it was caution. The wolves took the offering, dragging it back to the tree line. For a while, the forest was still. Then, from somewhere unseen, a soft, answering howl, long, almost mournful, drifted back across the snow. That sound lingered in their chests like an echo of something ancient. It was not language, yet it spoke. It said, "We are the same." For the first time, the hunters slept without guarding the fire. They did not know why they trusted, only that something beyond reason told them the night would pass safely. Over the following days, the wolves returned. They came not as ghosts of hunger now, but as shadows of companionship. They lingered near the camp, never crossing the boundary, but close enough to be seen to be remembered. When danger came from the woods, a larger predator, a rival pack, it was the wolves who first gave warning. Their howls sliced through sleep, and the tribe awoke in time. Protection, though wordless, had begun. The elders began to leave scraps deliberately, and the wolves began to stay longer. They learned each other's rhythms, when to approach, when to retreat. Fire no longer meant threat. Footsteps no longer meant prey. Between them grew a kind of unspoken treaty. We share the night, and we both endure. Somewhere in that exchange, something more profound took root, not just survival, but connection. A child, curious and fearless, extended a hand one morning toward the smallest of the wolves, a half-grown pup. The animal hesitated, nostrils flaring, then leaned forward and touched the fingers with a cold nose. The others watched, uncertain, as if witnessing a ritual older than memory. From that moment, the story of separation between man and beast began to blur. Companionship was never invented, it was remembered. It lived in the simple recognition that survival was easier beside another heartbeat. The wolves learned the meaning of warmth. The humans learned the comfort of warning. Together they began to hunt not as rivals, but as allies. The wolves could scent what human eyes could not see. The humans could craft tools and traps the wolves could not imagine. Between them, a new intelligence emerged. Cooperation born not of words, but of trust. They shared more than prey. They shared watchfulness, rhythm, the silence between attacks. The humans imitated the wolves' patience, their unity. The wolves mirrored the humans' courage. In that mutual observation, empathy was born. Not the gentle kind that comes from luxury, but the hard empathy of survival. The kind that sees itself in another's hunger and chooses not to harm. One night, as the fire crackled low, a wolf lay beside a sleeping hunter, the two bodies radiating warmth into the cold. Neither stirred at the nearness. Fear had become familiarity, and familiarity had become faith. The tribe began to paint these animals on cave walls not as monsters, but as guardians. The wolf no longer haunted their dreams. It walked within them, carrying messages of endurance. When dawn came, the world looked the same, grey, cold, endless, yet something irreversible had changed. The distance between species had narrowed to the width of a breath. A single act of shared hunger had created a bridge that would outlast ice, outlast time. Even now, when we look into the eyes of a dog, some remnant of that first night flickers there. The reflection of two species who learned to listen to the same silence. Loyalty, it seems, was not bred. It was remembered. It was the echo of a moment when fear bowed to trust, and the wild itself reached out a paw. The narrator's voice softens, the tone nearly a whisper. This was the first friendship, the first pact not written in blood but in warmth. The wolves who waited did not just change the fate of a tribe, they changed the shape of humanity. And as the fire burns steady once more, a question lingers in its light. If such trust could grow from fear, could it ever grow again between humans themselves? We survived not by being the strongest, but by feeling the deepest. Long before tools or language defined us, emotion did. The tribe's real weapon was not the spear, but the bond, that invisible current running between hearts that knew each other's rhythm. A single glance could summon courage. A shared silence could carry grief. The tribe was not a collection of bodies. It was one living organism, breathing through many lungs, dreaming through many eyes. When death came, it did not belong to the one who fell alone. It spread, softly, through the circle, through mothers, hunters, and children alike. The pain of one became the ache of all. They gathered around the still body, not yet understanding death, but feeling its weight in their own bones. Sometimes they would sit through the night beside the lost one, their hands resting lightly on cold skin, as though warmth could be persuaded to return. They did not yet have words for mourning, but the act itself became sacred, a ritual of shared endurance. In sorrow they found unity. That unity was not weakness, it was strategy. No creature thrived by isolating itself from the group. The lone hunter was faster, perhaps, but the tribe was infinite. It remembered when individuals forgot. It stood when single hearts broke. Empathy became the mind's extension beyond the self, the first true intelligence. Through feeling, they could anticipate, protect, adapt. To sense another's hunger, fear, or fatigue was to predict the tribe's next breath. This emotional awareness wove their separate instincts into one seamless survival pattern. Even their joy was collective. When food was found, laughter spread like light across faces. The meal itself was secondary. What nourished them most was the recognition of relief reflected in each other's eyes. To eat together was to exist together. The children would watch the adults and mimic that rhythm, learning without teaching, absorbing kindness through repetition. In that slow, shared education, civilization began to take root, quietly, long before anyone built a wall or carved a tool. At night, when the fire settled into a steady hum, they would draw close, not for warmth alone, but for reassurance. The heartbeat of the tribe was measured in nearness. Every soft touch, every exchanged glance reaffirmed belonging. In that closeness, a strange alchemy occurred. Emotion became pattern, pattern became thought, and thought became meaning. Empathy was not decoration. It was the architecture of the mind. There were moments when fear tested that connection, hunger dividing, danger demanding selfishness. Yet even then, something deeper pushed back. When one stole food and saw the hunger in another's eyes, guilt flickered the birth of conscience. When one risked their life to pull another from flood or fire, pride warmed them like sunlight. These small emotions were not random sparks. They were codes, teaching the body what it meant to be human. Morality began not in philosophy, but in pulse and tear. The tribe's power was not in command, but in resonance. To live within it was to feel the world multiplied through others, the comfort of being known without explanation. They did not need words to understand. Empathy filled the spaces where language did not yet exist. It was the world's first communication network, faster than speech, deeper than thought. A mother sensed her child's danger from across the camp. A hunter felt his companion's dread before the ambush began. These were not miracles, they were the sharpened echoes of connection. And as they continued to live, generation after generation, this ability deepened. They began to dream together, to carry shared emotions into sleep. One person's terror could become the tribe's vision, one person's hope, the tribe's prophecy. Through empathy, imagination was born, the ability to see through another's eyes, to step into lives not one's own. What began as survival slowly became art, belief, and story. The tribe within the tribe, the collective heart, became the origin of myth itself. Modern minds often mistake emotion for fragility, but the ancestors knew better. Feeling was their compass, their shield, their wisdom. It was empathy that taught them when to fight and when to yield, when to share and when to mourn. Even now, that same inheritance beats within us. When a stranger's cry stirs something unnamed inside, when a film makes us weep for lives we've never lived, it is that same ancient pulse, the tribe within, calling us back. They did not know they were building the foundation of consciousness. They only knew that being together felt right, that understanding was easier than indifference, that warmth was meant to be passed along. Their survival was not a triumph of strength but of softness, the courage to feel, even when it hurt. And from that courage, the next great power would emerge, the ability not just to share emotion, but to shape it into something eternal. From shared empathy would rise shared imagination, and from imagination, the first stories that could keep a whole world alive. When words were born, memory stopped fading. Before that moment, everything vanished with the dawn, the lessons of the hunt, the shape of a storm, the voice of the dead. Each truth lived only as long as someone could remember its rhythm. But one night, around the fire's soft pulse, sound became more than noise. A hum, a murmur, a shared vibration in the dark, and suddenly the unspoken world began to find its names. The tribe did not invent speech all at once. It grew like roots beneath the soil, unseen at first, connecting minds before they even realized it. A cry of warning, a call of joy, a sigh of relief the body had already been speaking long before the tongue learned to follow. Over generations, these sounds gathered meaning, like sparks collecting into flame. The first words were not about control, they were about belonging. They named what they loved and what they feared, so neither would disappear entirely into silence. Around the fire, the night deepened, and the people began to speak to things unseen. They named the wind that carried their scent, the stars that returned each season, the flames that swallowed and gave light. Naming was not dominance, it was devotion. To name was to remember. To remember was to keep alive. Each word was a small act of defiance against forgetting, a promise that even the fleeting could endure if held in sound. Soon, the rhythm of speech became music. Voices rose together, weaving patterns of tone and breath. The first songs were not composed. They happened, like rain. The wind joined in, bending the smoke, and the earth answered in the steady beat of feet against ground. It was language before structure, a lullaby to the universe, asking it to listen back. When they sang, they were no longer alone in the dark. The air itself seemed to shimmer with attention. The ancestors did not separate prayer from song. Every sound offered upward was both gratitude and plea. Thank you for this day, let there be another. The fire crackled in response, and they heard meaning in the rhythm. They began to believe that perhaps the world was not silent after all, that it spoke through echo and coincidence, through the movement of birds and the whisper of leaves. The boundary between speech and listening blurred, until communication became communion. The first myths were born from this listening. A thunderclap became the footstep of something vast. A star that fell was a messenger. The moon, a face watching over the weary. These were not lies, they were translations, efforts to speak the world's mysterious language back to itself. Each story carried not fact, but feeling, a way of holding the infinite within reach. Through storytelling, fear transformed into understanding, and understanding became hope. Children gathered close when the elders spoke. Their eyes reflected firelight like water holding stars. They learned not just through words, but through rhythm. The soft pauses, the careful repetition, the rise and fall of tone. Each sound settled into them like a seed. Through story, the tribe remembered who they were, where they came from, and what they might become. Language became inheritance, invisible, portable, eternal. And still, the voices grew bolder. They began to speak to the sky directly. When the storms rolled in, they raised their hands and called out. When the rains came, they thanked. When nothing answered, they spoke louder, believing the silence itself was a kind of response. The act of speaking became sacred, a bridge between the known and the unseen. They could not control the world, but they could name it, and in naming, they found peace. As the centuries passed, the simple hum around the fire turned into the architecture of thought. Language became map, mirror, and memory. It carried emotion across distance, carried death into legacy, carried the fragile present into the hands of the unborn. The first storytellers did not seek meaning. They created it, shaping chaos into comfort, turning fear into form. And perhaps that is what made us human, the refusal to let experience dissolve. Every word was a thread, tying the living to the lost, the sky to the soil, the body to the breath of time itself. To speak was to resist the void, to carve shape from silence. Even now, when we whisper a name, tell a story, or sing into the dark, we are repeating that first miracle the moment sound became memory. The narrator pauses, as though listening for the echo that still hums beneath language. It is faint but eternal, a pulse stretching from the first fire to this very moment. The story does not end, it only changes voice. For when we spoke to the sky, we were not just asking for survival, we were teaching the universe how to remember us. And from that act of remembrance would come the next great creation, imagination, the power to see beyond what was and shape what could be. Before prophecy or prayer, there was the dream. When the world finally grew quiet and the tribe sank into sleep, the fire remained awake. Its slow, pulsing glow was the only heartbeat that did not rest. Shadows leaned and breathed across the cave walls, turning stillness into story. To the ancestors, this was not imagination, it was visitation. In the wavering light, the line between waking and dreaming blurred until both belonged to the same realm. The night was their teacher. In its deep silence, the mind wandered into territories untouched by daylight. Dreams carried them to places the body could never go, to hunts long past, to ancestors long gone, to omens waiting beyond the horizon. They did not call it dreaming then, they called it remembering. Each vision was treated as a message, a lesson carried through sleep from something older than thought. The dead spoke through symbols, animals through movement, the sky through colour. Every morning began not with questions, but with interpretations. A dream was not a private thing. When the tribe woke, they shared what they had seen: the red river, the broken moon, the beast with two heads. The elders listened, nodding in rhythm to the flicker of flame, translating the visions into warnings or blessings. A dream of fire meant change. A dream of falling, hunger. A dream of water, the nearness of rain. The mind, they believed, did not simply rest, it roamed. And where it wandered, the spirit followed. The fire was the gatekeeper between these worlds. Its light marked the boundary. Beyond it, the domain of beasts and gods, Within it, the fragile order of humanity. The flames whispered their own language, shifting shapes that mirrored memory and desire. Sometimes, the sleeping eyes of the tribe caught those movements even through closed lids, light and shadow, imprinting themselves onto the dream. The fire became a mirror of the inner life, a silent companion that carried their visions upward with its smoke. In the rhythm of those nights, the foundations of imagination took root. The tribe began to see patterns in the chaos, the same stars appearing in different dreams, the same beasts returning again and again. They started to recognize repetition, to find meaning in recurrence. It was this instinct, this gentle weaving of images into connection, that would one day become the logic of story, the structure of myth. The mind was learning to narrate what it did not understand. To dream was to practice survival. In dreams they rehearsed fear safely. They relived the chase, the hunt, the escape. They met danger in visions so that waking life might be met with readiness. Some dreams were warnings of cliffs unseen, of floods approaching. Whether those visions were coincidence or intuition did not matter. Belief itself saved them. The dream became a tool for pattern recognition, for foresight, for adaptation. In sleep, imagination evolved into intelligence. The narrator lingers here, describing the hush of the sleeping camp, the soft chorus of breath, the gentle crackle of ash, the way smoke curled like thought made visible. Every sound is magnified in the quiet. The shift of an infant, the sigh of an elder, the distant bark of a creature unseen. It is in this suspended moment that consciousness blooms. The tribe does not yet know that it is inventing, meaning only that meaning feels present, close, alive in the dark. Sometimes they would wake in the middle of the night, eyes wide, unsure if what they saw was dream or revelation. The boundary between the two was porous. The fire still moved, painting forms that looked like animals or faces. They would whisper the names of those shapes to one another, marking the birth of symbolism, the ability to hold a thought outside oneself. In those whispers, imagination became a shared territory. Dreams also stitched the tribe together. The one who dreamt of the hunt was not the same as the one who carried the spear, yet both believed the vision belonged to all. It gave them purpose, direction, and reassurance. When one saw a river in sleep, the tribe moved toward water. When one dreamt of light, the tribe prepared for dawn. The mind of one became the compass of many, and thus, through the mystery of dreaming, humanity learned the value of trust. Modern minds still wander down those same corridors. Even now, in the dim hours before waking, we find ourselves walking paths we have never seen, meeting faces that feel familiar, though we've never known them. The old fire still burns behind our eyelids, flickering, shaping, speaking. The brain, ancient and loyal, continues its nightly ritual of remembering the unseen. Dreaming was the first faith, not in gods, but in meaning itself. To sleep was to surrender to the unknown, and wake believing that something within the darkness cared enough to answer. Every dream, whether of terror or wonder, was proof that the human spirit refused to exist in silence. The ancestors did not dream merely to rest. They dreamed to connect, to continue the dialogue between what was known and what could never be known. The narrator's tone softens, almost a whisper now. The fire dims, the tribe stirs, and the world begins to glow with early grey light. The night, their classroom, closes its lesson. The dreams retreat but leave their imprint shapes, stories, symbols that will rise again when tongues learn to name them. For in the stillness of that ancient night, imagination was born, and with it, the first promise that the mind could travel farther than the body, that thought could outlast breath, and that memory, once spoken, could live forever. When we painted the hunt, we remembered how not to die. The walls of the cave were not decoration, they were memory made visible. Each stroke of ochre and ash was a whisper to the future, a way of saying, we were here, and this is what mattered. The hunters traced the outlines of beasts they feared and revered, their hands trembling not with artistry, but with awe. They did not paint what they saw, they painted what they hoped to survive. In that simple act, story was born. By the light of the fire, they reimagined the day's dangers into something manageable, something sacred. The bison they could not kill by strength alone could be conquered by image. To paint it was to understand it, to learn its movements, to feel mastery over what once brought terror. Fear, transmuted through imagination, became wisdom. The wall became a teacher, the pigment a spell, the act itself a ritual of survival disguised as wonder. Above them, the stars watched in silence. The same hands that drew beasts on stone began to trace constellations in the sky. A cluster of lights became a hunter, another his prey. They saw meaning in repetition, stories in pattern. The sky, like the cave wall, became a canvas for memory. The tribe told their children that those shining figures were ancestors, guardians, reminders that nothing truly vanished, it only changed form. In this way, myth became both comfort and compass. Thunder was no longer chaos, it was a god's voice echoing across mountains. Fire was no longer a trick of friction, it was a gift stolen from divine hands. The unknown stopped being emptiness and became presence, something that could be named, thanked, or feared with intention. When lightning struck a tree, they did not flee, they bowed. To explain was to control, and to imagine was to explain. In these stories, the wild world softened just enough to be endured. Every myth began as an answer to a trembling question. Why do we die? Where do we go? Why does the sun return? Around the fire, these questions found rhythm. The elders' voices rose and fell like the wind through reeds. Each story carried both lesson and lullaby, teaching the children not just how to live, but how to wonder. They learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the transformation of it into meaning. And so, storytelling became the night's second fire. Words burned in the mind long after the embers cooled. The tribe discovered that imagination could keep them safe, not through magic, but through memory. When a child heard the tale of a spirit that punished waste, they learned to share. When they heard of a hunter who ignored the omens and vanished, they learned caution. Morality was born in metaphor. Myth was how instinct learned to think. The narrator pauses, letting the rhythm slow, the tone soft, almost reverent. The first myths were not lies. They were empathy turned outward. Humanity's attempt to see consciousness reflected in the universe. Every flame, every shadow, every rustle in the leaves became part of an ongoing conversation. The world was alive, with meaning because they chose to speak to it as if it were. And in return, it began to speak back in thunder, in rain, in dream. The tribe's greatest discovery was that imagination could preserve life. When they reenacted the hunt in story, they rehearsed success. When they recited their legends of fire and flood, they passed warnings across generations. Each retelling strengthened memory, binding the living to the dead, the known to the unseen. To forget a myth was to risk repeating its lesson. To remember it was to endure. Survival became not just physical, but narrative. And beneath that endurance, something tender began to grow. Faith. Not in gods, not yet, but in connection, in the invisible thread between voice and world. The storyteller's task was sacred. Their words were bridges between danger and understanding, between night and dawn. The tribe gathered closer when the stories began, hearts sinking to the rhythm of the voice, as if the tale itself could shield them from what waited in the dark beyond the fire. The narrator's voice softens again. The fire flickers lower, painting the walls with shifting beasts. The stories fade into murmurs, the listeners into dreamers. Outside, the stars turn slowly above a sleeping world. Within that silence, the myths continue their work not as fantasy, but as memory keeping watch. For through story, the tribe had done something extraordinary. They had turned fear into beauty, and beauty into survival. And when the morning comes, they will rise, carrying those stories in their breath, repeating them to the next circle of listeners. Myth will become ritual, and ritual will become the body of belief, the living bridge between imagination and faith. We danced so the sun would remember us. Long before calendars or clocks, the rhythm of movement was how humanity measured time. The tribe learned that to repeat something was to make it real. A gesture done once was chance. Done again, it became promise. When they buried their dead, when they raised their hands to the sky, when they stepped in slow circles around the fire, they were not merely performing, they were remembering. Ritual was how the mind carved order into the wilderness of existence. The first ceremonies were born from instinct rather than instruction. When someone died, the tribe gathered not to understand death, but to surround it. They touched the body, sang softly, placed food and flowers beside it, hoping that warmth might cross the boundary. No one told them what to do, the act itself told them. The repetition soothed what words could not. It transformed grief into rhythm, chaos into form. The body returned to the earth, and in that surrender, life seemed to promise continuation. At dawn, they danced. The steps were simple, the beat steady, the sound of bare feet against dirt, of breath falling in unison. Each movement echoed the cycle they saw around them. Sun rising, moon fading, tides shifting. Through dance, they reminded themselves that they belonged to this pattern, not above it. To dance was to join creation, to affirm that the pulse of life still moved through them despite loss. The ground remembered their feet. The air remembered their song. Soon, these repetitions became sacred. The same gestures performed across seasons began to shape belief. They sang before the hunt, not to summon luck, but to steady the heart. They lit fires during storms, not to challenge the heavens, but to mirror their power. Ritual was reflection, the human mind imitating the rhythm of nature until the two became one. Through repetition, they discovered harmony. Through harmony, meaning. The narrator's voice slows, each phrase a gentle incantation. The fire burns evenly now, its light pulsing in time with the imagined drum. The tribe's movements are neither urgent nor aimless. They flow like water, rising and falling with the night's breath. To outsiders, it might have looked like worship, but to them, it was memory in motion. Each turn, each chant was a way of saying, "We are still here." Over generations, these rituals deepened. The tribe began to decorate their ceremonies with symbols: red ochre for life, white ash for spirit, black charcoal for return. The colors told stories that speech could not, guiding the participants into shared emotion. Even when the reason for a ritual faded, the act remained, preserved by its beauty. They no longer remembered why they circled the fire 7 times, but they knew the world felt right when they did. The body carried what the mind forgot. Rituals also became bridges between generations. Children learned them before they learned words, mimicking the gestures of their elders. The old taught not by explanation, but by example, by repetition so patient it became eternal. In this way, knowledge flowed without need for books or instruction. The ceremony was the archive, and memory lived in movement. The tribe did not have history written in ink, they had it written in rhythm. When danger or famine came, ritual steadied them. In uncertainty, the repetition of the familiar felt like safety. The chants rose louder during storms, the dances more deliberate when the crops failed. Through ritual, fear became bearable, not because it disappeared, but because it found shape. The tribe could not control nature, but they could mirror it, echo it, remind it of their existence. To move in rhythm with the world was to trust that the world, somehow, was listening. And perhaps it was. When the sun returned after the longest night, they believed their dance had been heard. When the rains came after prayer, they felt the universe respond. Whether coincidence or communion, the feeling of connection was real. Ritual gave the illusion of dialogue, and in that illusion, humanity found peace. It was enough to believe that the earth noticed. Even now, remnants of those ancient movements linger. We light candles to remember. We pause in silence before meals. We repeat words at weddings and funerals, not because we understand them, but because they carry the weight of countless echoes. Each act says, "This has been done before, this will be done again. Therefore, we are not alone." The narrator pauses. The imagined drums fade into the low hum of the earth itself. Ritual, it seems, was never about commanding the divine, it was about synchronizing with it. Through repetition, humanity taught itself to belong. Through ceremony, it learned continuity. The fire burned steady, reflecting in every eye the same unspoken truth, that the rhythm of existence must be remembered, or the world forgets its song. From this stillness, from this order born of pattern, the next age will rise. Civilization will come, with its walls and hierarchies, and it will test the simplicity of ritual's harmony. But for now, in the glow of fire and movement, humanity is one breath, one rhythm, one quiet prayer to the turning of the sky. We built shelters and caged the wind inside. For the first time in human memory, the horizon stopped moving. The endless paths of migration gave way to walls of mud and wood, to fences made of woven reeds. What began as necessity, a pause for the sick, a refuge from the storm, slowly became permanence. And in that stillness, something profound shifted. The hunter became the dweller. The wanderer became the keeper. The wild pulse that once moved with the seasons began to echo inside narrow spaces, softer now, restrained. At dawn, the first villages exhaled smoke into the pale sky. It drifted upward in thin ribbons from roofs of grass and clay, marking the birth of home. Children woke to the scent of hearthfire instead of frost. The air smelled of grain, of ash, of new labour. Fields stretched where forests once whispered. The ground, once untamed, now wore the imprint of tools, straight lines, where roots had once tangled freely. Humanity had done something unimaginable. It had persuaded the earth to stay still with it. There was comfort in this new rhythm. Food could be stored, shelters repaired, fires relit from the same ash each morning. Life no longer depended on chance alone, but safety came with a quiet cost. The same walls that guarded them also enclosed them. The wind, once companion and guide, now pressed against their huts, like a restless spirit, longing to be remembered. The villagers, hearing it outside, felt both gratitude and grief. They had traded movement for certainty, freedom for shelter. The narrator's voice slows, describing the calm beauty of early settlement, the glint of dew on planted rows, the soft clatter of clay bowls, the murmur of voices beginning to replace the silence of wilderness. These were tender sounds, fragile as the first attempts at permanence. They believed they had mastered the earth, yet it was the earth that had mastered them. To plant was to promise return. To build was to bind oneself to a place. Days lengthened into patterns. The tribe that once followed the stars now followed schedules. Sunlight meant labour, twilight meant rest. Their minds, once tuned to the rhythm of migration, began to think in circles, seasons, instead of horizons. The concept of home took shape, and with it came both love and limitation. They found comfort in proximity, but unease in stillness. The ground that fed them also held them in place, quietly reminding them that roots and chains can sometimes feel the same. Inside the village, the first echoes of ownership began to stir. The field a man had tilled felt different from the one he hadn't. The walls he built became his walls. What had once been shared became separate water divided by channel, soil by boundary, labour by claim. It happened slowly, almost invisibly, born not from greed but from habit. Staying still made memory cling to objects, and memory made possession inevitable. Yet not all was loss. Stillness brought tenderness too. Families could grow, children could learn, the elders could teach without fear of leaving mid-season. The hearth became a second sun, constant, central, quietly sacred. Around it stories lengthened. The nights grew safer, but the dreams grew smaller. Where once they dreamed of stars and spirits, they now dreamed of harvests and fences that did not break. The imagination, once nomadic, began to settle too. The narrator pauses, as if letting the smoke rise again from those first hearths. In their stillness, people discovered new forms of beauty. The rhythm of sowing and reaping, the satisfaction of shaping clay, the comfort of returning to the same doorway each night. Life no longer felt like survival. It felt like continuity. Yet beneath that comfort was a faint ache, a memory of the open plains whispering that safety was only another kind of wilderness, one that lived inside the heart. Sometimes, when the wind swept across the fields at dusk, the villagers would fall silent. The sound carried an ancient familiarity, the echo of movement, the ghost of distance. It reminded them of paths once taken, of stars once followed. They would look beyond the edges of their fences and feel the faint pull of the horizon. But then the light would fade, and the fire would call them home. The feeling would pass, replaced by the soft murmur of belonging. We built shelters and caged the wind inside. The phrase would have meant nothing to them then, yet its truth lived in their bones. Humanity had found warmth and stability, but it had also confined the wild rhythm that once defined it. The instincts that guided migration to move, to adapt, to remain fluid, were replaced by a new discipline: endurance. Stillness demanded patience instead of speed, repetition instead of change. It was the first quiet transformation of spirit. But in that transformation, seeds of both wonder and sorrow were sown. Villages taught cooperation, but also comparison. They offered safety, but whispered of loss. Each roof was both shelter and surrender. The human story, once written in footsteps, began to be written in walls. The soil no longer only fed the tribe, it claimed them. And though they did not yet know it, civilization had begun not with conquest or invention, but with the gentle sound of someone choosing to stay. The narrator's tone softens to a close. Smoke fades into the sky, the huts glow faintly with evening fire, and the wind sighs through the narrow paths between homes. The people sleep peacefully, unaware that in taming the world, they have begun to tame themselves. From this stillness will come the next lesson, how shelter gives birth to ownership, and how survival, once shared, begins to divide. The moment we said mine, the earth forgot our names. It did not happen through conquest or greed, but through a quiet change of thought, a shift so small it went unnoticed until it had already shaped the soul. In the first villages, what had been shared became claimed. The river that once belonged to everyone began to belong to someone. The soil which had fed generations without memory of debt became marked by boundaries drawn in the dust. Ownership was not born from arrogance, but from fear, the fear of loss in a world that had once given freely. At first, possession seemed like gratitude. To build a fence was to protect the harvest. To carve a symbol into a clay pot was to ensure it returned to the same hands. But with every claim, something invisible retreated. The rhythm of giving and receiving, once effortless as breath, began to falter. The tribe that had once moved together through abundance and hunger now measured worth by keeping rather than sharing. And the more they kept, the more fragile their peace became. The narrator's voice remains calm, observing rather than condemning. It describes how language itself began to shift. Words like ours grew thin, replaced by mine, my field, my hut, my child. The sound of unity dissolved into possession. And yet, no one meant harm. They believed they were preserving life, not dividing it. They were trying to hold on to safety, unaware that the very act of holding was what made it slip away. Inequality did not arrive as a tyrant, it crept in as a shadow. The one with more grain was asked for less labour. The one with fewer tools was given fewer choices. Over time, the circle of belonging narrowed. The village, once a living organism breathing in unison, began to fragment into parts. Where empathy had once flowed like water, comparison began to thicken the air. The instinct to cooperate became strategy. Friendship became alliance. Kindness became transaction. Still, the earth remained silent. It accepted the furrows carved into its body, the walls pressed into its skin. It yielded crops as before, but the people no longer looked at it with reverence. They began to see land not as life, but as possession, something to manage, to measure, to divide. The field was no longer an extension of the self, but an object outside it. In separating what they owned from what they were, humanity unknowingly exiled itself from the living world. The narrator lingers on this quiet irony. That ownership, meant to bring peace, introduced anxiety instead. For once something could be lost, it had to be protected. Fear crept back into the human story, not the primal fear of predators, but a subtler one, the fear of theft, of envy, of scarcity in the midst of plenty. Fences rose higher, both around homes and within hearts. The walls of clay hardened into habit. Each person began to guard not just their grain, but their silence. There were still moments of generosity. Of course, a shared meal, a neighbour's kindness, but even these became choices rather than instincts. Giving was no longer the natural state of being. It was an act that required justification. A new kind of morality emerged, one that measured goodness against ownership. He is a good man, they said, because he shares what is his. They forgot there was once a time when nothing needed to be his at all. Yet the memory of the older way lingered, faint but stubborn, in the human spirit. The old songs, the ones sung before walls, before claims, still carried the echo of belonging. The children, when they played beyond the village, still laughed like wanderers, untethered. The elders sometimes looked at the fences and frowned, though they could not explain why. Deep down, some part of them still missed the freedom of not possessing, of being part of what could not be owned. The narrator's tone softens, reflecting that all this was not sin, but evolution. The need to claim was born from love, love for the familiar, love for safety, love for the illusion that permanence could be created. Humanity wanted to hold the light that flickered, to keep what had always slipped away. but in doing so, they began to mistake containment for care and security for meaning. The moment we said mine, the earth forgot our names not out of anger, but out of confusion. It had never known how to divide itself. To the rivers and stones, to the sky and wind, nothing belonged to anyone. They watched as the humans built and bartered, as they whispered of wealth and worth, unable to remember that the world had once been a shared song. Now, under the same stars that had once guided nomads, the fires of the villages burned alone. Each flame was steady, but isolated, glowing behind walls, casting shadows instead of warmth. And though humanity did not yet know it, this small forgetting, this illusion of possession had awakened something old within them. The return of fear. Not the fear of darkness, but the fear of each other. And from that fear, the next chapter of their story would begin. When we locked our doors, we also locked our hearts. In the stillness of the first settled age, something subtle but immense began to change. The fences that kept danger away also kept distance within. The people who once slept beneath the same stars now slept behind separate walls. They could still hear each other, the cough of a neighbour, the cry of a child, yet something invisible had thickened between them. It was the quiet birth of solitude, not as peace, but as partition. The narrator's tone drifts like smoke through these new boundaries. In the earliest days of home, the hearth replaced the campfire, and with it, togetherness turned inward. The tribe had become a collection of families, each with its own flame. The songs once sung in circles were now whispered to sleeping children. The stories that had once echoed across valleys grew soft, private, diminished to embers. For the first time, humanity belonged not to the world, but to itself, and the self, though newly born, was already lonely. This separation birthed identity, and with it, reflection. To be alone meant to be aware of one's body, one's possessions, one's mind. The hunter once defined by the group became the man with the field. The woman once known by kinship became the mother of children. Identity promised meaning but carried cost. What had once been shared instinct became personal story, and with that, empathy began to fracture into individuality. Humanity was learning to look inward, but in doing so, it forgot how to look across. The walls taught a dangerous kind of silence, the silence of comparison. Behind them, thoughts multiplied. Who has more? Who deserves less? The field that yielded plenty was no longer joy for the village, but pride for the owner. The failing harvest became shame, not shared sorrow. And so, emotion, once communal, began to divide. Envy crept in like wind beneath a door, and trust, that ancient rhythm of survival, faltered into suspicion. Yet even as the heart grew guarded, a strange new awareness took hold. Solitude gave birth to imagination. Alone, the mind began to speak to itself, to dream in private, to question, to create. The inner voice, unknown to the tribe, emerged as companion and judge. It whispered fears, but also visions. In its echo, humanity learned introspection, and with introspection came the first shadows of conscience. To feel guilt or longing required a boundary within the self. The same walls that separated people from one another had begun to divide each person from their own instincts. The narrator speaks softly, as though tracing the edges of a wound. Loneliness was not punishment, it was evolution's side effect. When the human mind learned to say, I, it gained the power to wonder, but also the ability to ache. No predator had ever made humanity suffer as deeply as its own awareness. The eyes that once scanned the horizon for danger now turned inward, searching for meaning and finding distance instead. The stranger outside had become the stranger within. Still, not all was sorrow. The heart that felt isolation also felt empathy more sharply than before. To be aware of one's own loneliness was to recognize it in another. This paradox that separation deepened, compassion became the quiet gift of the new age. Out of it would rise art, prayer, philosophy, the endless attempt to bridge the distance the walls had created. Humanity, in dividing, had discovered yearning, and yearning, more than hunger or fear, would carry the species forward. The narrator pauses, letting the quiet stretch. Imagine one of those early nights, a single figure standing at the doorway of a small hut, looking at the stars. The fire inside burns low, the village sleeps. The figure feels the vastness pressing against the fragile walls, and wonders where the others have gone, not the neighbours nearby, but the larger we that once existed. The sky, vast and familiar, offers no answer. It only stares back, silent and ancient, as if waiting for the human heart to learn again how to speak without words. When we locked our doors, we also locked our hearts. But not forever. Inside each enclosure, the embers of connection still glowed. The instinct to reach out, to share warmth, to remember the larger tribe, it never died. It only slept, waiting beneath centuries of habit and hierarchy. For even in solitude, the pulse of belonging persisted, faint but unbroken, whispering that the self is not a cage but a circle waiting to reopen. And soon, it would. For what was divided can be remembered. The human heart, though surrounded by walls, would one day rediscover its ancient rhythm, the quiet call to unity, the old pulse of the earth itself, still beating softly beneath the weight of civilization. The body remembers what the mind forgot. Long before maps, before stars were charted or winds were named, there was a quieter guide, a pull within the flesh that knew where to go. It did not speak in words or signs, but in sensations. A quickened pulse when danger neared, a warmth in the chest when the path was right, a calm certainty that required no proof. This was the ancient compass, the one that lived beneath thought, the instinct that once led humanity through storms, across oceans, through ages of unknowing. In those early days, direction was not something learned, it was something felt. The tribe followed invisible lines of energy drawn across the earth. Birds, whales, and wolves moved along them too, as if all life were reading from the same unwritten map. The ancestors trusted that when hunger called, the body would guide them toward food. When danger loomed, their skin would tighten, their senses heighten, long before sight confirmed what was already known. They did not need to explain it. Trusting it was enough. The narrator's voice moves slowly now, like footsteps through fog. It describes how the body once carried its own wisdom, knowledge born not of study but of participation. To be alive was to listen constantly. The wind had direction, the soil had moods, the clouds spoke in tone. Humanity did not dominate nature, it conversed with it. Every creature, every breath of air was part of a grand and wordless dialogue. The compass was not just within, it was everywhere, mirrored in the balance between body and world. But as centuries passed, that dialogue began to fade. Reason grew louder. The compass did not vanish, it was drowned. Cities replaced paths, roads replaced rivers, and the soft hum of intuition was buried beneath engines, voices, and clocks. We traded listening for measurement, awareness for information. The mind began to dictate, and the body began to obey. Yet obedience is not the same as understanding. The old knowing still whispers, but few stop long enough to hear it. The ancestors would have called it madness, to doubt what the skin feels, to mistrust the pulse of one's own breath. They knew the body as the first prophet, the first scientist. When the weather changed, they felt it in their bones. When a storm approached, their sleep grew restless. They could smell the turning of the seasons, hear distance in the pitch of a bird's cry. Today, we wait for forecasts to confirm what they would have sensed before sunrise. The compass has not broken. It has been silenced by disbelief. Still, it waits that quiet intelligence beneath the noise. Sometimes it slips through. The sudden dread before an accident, the inexplicable calm in a stranger's presence, the way we know we're being watched before we see the eyes. We call it coincidence, intuition, or instinct, but these are only names for an older truth. The body has never stopped remembering. It carries the memory of every ancestor who ever survived, by listening deeper than logic. Within our veins flow the echoes of those who trusted what could not be seen. The narrator pauses, letting that thought linger like a held breath. There is no mysticism here, only memory, alive in muscle and marrow. The ancient compass is not magic, it is biology's poetry. The heart quickens before the mind can explain why. The skin prickles before danger has taken shape. Somewhere between nerve and soul lies the remnant of our original intelligence, not thinking but knowing. If you've ever stood before the sea and felt the pull to walk into it, if you've ever followed a path without reason and found what you didn't know you were looking for, you have felt it too. The compass still points, though not toward north or south. It points toward harmony, the alignment between inner and outer worlds, the balance that once guided the first migrations, the unseen current that turns chaos into rhythm. The narrator's tone grows softer, almost a lullaby. Imagine the ancestors standing on an open plain, the air heavy with rain. They do not run. They wait, feeling the shift of pressure on their skin, the message of wind through grass. The body translates what the world is saying. It tells them when to move, when to rest, when to trust. It is not obedience, it is participation. To listen to the earth was to belong to it. They did not navigate the land navigated them. Modern life has made such listening rare, but not impossible. Beneath the static of distraction, the compass still hums, faint and patient. It calls us back in small ways through stillness, through breath, through the inexplicable peace that arrives when we stop seeking proof. We may not remember the path, but the body does. It always has. The narrator sighs, as though watching smoke fade into twilight. The forgotten compass is still there, waiting in each of us, the soft alignment between sense and world, the pulse that says yes before thought interrupts. The mind may forget, but the body remembers how to notice, how to move, how to trust the quiet signals that once kept us alive. And perhaps this is where faith truly began, not as belief in gods, but as belief in the unseen guidance that lives within us. From sensing came knowing, and from knowing came wonder. The compass that once led through wilderness would soon lead through spirit. Every prayer began as a heartbeat. Before temples or chants had names, before gods were carved into stone, rhythm was the first language of devotion. The tribe did not pray with words, they prayed with breath, with movement, with the steady thrum that lived inside their ribs. To feel the heart was to remember the universe's oldest sound. The same pulse that guided blood through flesh was the pulse that guided stars through sky. In rhythm, they found belonging not only to one another, but to everything. At night, when firelight swayed against the cave walls, they began to drum. The sound was not performance, but presence. Each beat was an offering, a conversation between body and earth. The people did not play to fill the silence. They played to hear it answer. The rhythm spread outward, echoing through bone, through soil, through darkness. And when voices joined the drums, low and steady, a strange alignment took hold, the many hearts becoming one. The air itself seemed to breathe with them. The narrator speaks softly, as though describing a trance. This was the first collective meditation, though they would not have called it that. The drum was the heartbeat of the tribe, the chant, its breath. Together, they learned that sound could dissolve the boundaries of self. In that rhythmic communion, fear lessened, grief softened, and even death felt less final. For in rhythm, everything returned. The seasons, the moon, the breath. The body had simply been a smaller echo of the cosmos all along. The pulse was sacred because it could not lie. Words could deceive, thoughts could scatter, but rhythm was pure truth. When the drumming began, even the doubters surrendered. The old hunters would close their eyes and find themselves swaying with the same grace as the young. The children, whose hearts raced too quickly, slowed to match the elders. The fire dimmed and flared in time with their unity. It was not music, it was memory reawakening, the remembrance that all life beats in time. Over generations, rhythm became ceremony. The tribe learned to mark births and deaths not only with offerings, but with sound. When a child arrived, the mother's heartbeat was echoed in drum and chant. When someone passed, the same rhythm guided them onward. The people did not fear the silence after death, for they believed the departed had only joined a larger rhythm, the endless pulse of the world itself. To stop the drum was to forget that continuity. To play it was to remember. The narrator's tone slows to a near whisper. In these ancient rituals, breathing itself became sacred. The inhale was creation, the exhale release. Together, the tribe breathed in long, deliberate waves until individual lungs seemed to disappear. The line between body and spirit blurred. The rhythm folded them into one living being, an organism called us. When the drumming ceased, there was no applause. There was only stillness. And in that stillness, peace. Even the elements followed rhythm. The waves broke in time with the heart. The wind arrived in pulses, the rain in patterns. They saw it everywhere. In the flicker of fire, the cycle of sleep, the slow, patient beat of day into night. Rhythm was not something they made, it was something they joined. The drum was merely the doorway, the bridge between mortal sound and eternal motion. Through it, they learned to travel without moving, to listen without ears, to feel without touching. The narrator lingers on the intimacy of this discovery, that the heartbeat itself was a form of prayer, constant and wordless. Every creature carried its own altar inside. No stone needed to be lifted, no fire lit, no words spoken, only the quiet awareness of life's persistence. Even now, when we press a hand to the chest and feel that steady pulse, we are hearing the same song the ancestors once drummed to the stars. And perhaps that is why rhythm has never left us. It lives in the sway of walking, the rise and fall of breathing, the repetition of waves against shore. Modern music, even at its loudest, is only the echo of that first communion. The attempt to recreate what once came naturally. The sacred pulse remains, waiting in every silence, in every pause between words. It is both anchor and invitation, reminding us that life is not a thought but a tempo. Every prayer began as a heartbeat. Even now, when we close our eyes and breathe in rhythm, we return to that truth. We remember that we are not separate from the world but synchronized with it. The cosmos beats through us, not metaphorically, but literally. The heart's rhythm is the earth's rhythm slowed to flesh, the sky's rhythm translated into blood. And from that realization, this merging of sound, soul and breath, would come the next great transformation, the birth of sacred space. The tribe would learn to give rhythm a home, to anchor the pulse in stone and shadow. The heartbeat would become architecture, the echo, eternal. The first temples were not built to contain gods, but to remember the sound of being alive. Some stones were built not to last, but to remember. They rise from the earth like frozen breaths, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. To stand among them is to feel time slow to the rhythm of the planet itself. The air hums differently here, dense with memory. Each stone, though silent, seems to speak. It does not tell of gods or kings, but of hands, countless hands that once lifted, shaped, and placed it in harmony with the sun and stars. These were not monuments to power, they were messages to eternity. The narrator's voice softens, describing the landscape as if seen through dawn mist. There are circles of stone aligned with sunrise, towers marking solstice, mounds that mirror constellations. The people who built them left no written word, yet they understood geometry as devotion. To them, direction was sacred, alignment was prayer. Each placement echoed the rhythm of the sacred pulse, translating heartbeat into horizon. The earth was the altar, the sky, the witness. In raising stone, they anchored spirit to matter, a conversation between permanence and the invisible. No one knows precisely why these megaliths were built, yet the uncertainty itself feels holy. Perhaps they were calendars, perhaps tombs, perhaps something simpler, a way to hold memory in a form the wind could not erase. In a world where nothing endured, not faces, not fires, not even names, the act of building became resistance against forgetting. To lift a stone was to say, "We were here," and to place it upright was to teach the sky how to listen. The narrator pauses. Imagine them at dawn, men and women moving in silence, ropes creaking, breath clouding in the cold. Their task was not hurried, it was ceremony. Each motion repeated what had been done before, tracing the rhythm of generations. They believed the stones themselves possessed spirit, that weight could hold memory, that matter could remember motion. When the work was done, they stepped back not to admire, but to feel. The alignment was exact. The light touched the surface at just the right moment. The world, for an instant, seemed to recognize itself. Over time, these places became sanctuaries not just for ritual, but for reflection. People came to them in search of meaning, healing, or simply silence. The stones listened without judgment. They absorbed the sound of prayers, the echo of chants, the weeping of mourners. Even now, when all words have faded, their surfaces hum faintly, as if storing the vibration of countless human hearts. To touch them is to feel continuity, the reminder that spirit does not vanish. It condenses. The narrator's tone deepens, reverent and slow. Architecture, at its origin, was never meant to dominate nature but to converse with it. The stones did not seek to defy the sky. They sought to meet it halfway. Each doorway framed the horizon, each shadow measured the passing Sunday. These were not temples built to contain divinity, but instruments to remember its rhythm. The builders understood something we have nearly forgotten, that space itself can be sacred when aligned with wonder. As centuries passed, the meaning of these places blurred. The builders vanished, leaving their structures behind like open questions. Others arrived and renamed them. Gods changed, languages shifted, but the stones remained. They stood patient and unbending, witnesses to every rise and fall of human thought. Civilizations would claim them, scholars would measure them, pilgrims would touch them, but none could fully explain them. Mystery was their true endurance. Even now, when the modern traveller walks among those ruins, something quiet stirs in the chest, a recognition without language. The stones are not foreign, they are familiar. Perhaps it is because we sense, deep within, that these monuments were built not for worship, but for remembrance of the harmony once shared between body and earth, sound and silence, spirit and form. The ancients carved their listening into stone so that, when our hearing failed, we might still feel it through our feet. The narrator slows to a near whisper, inviting the listener to imagine pressing a palm against cold rock at dawn. The stone holds its own heartbeat, faint, ancient, steady. It is the same rhythm that once lived in drums and chants, now trapped in mineral sleep. Standing there, we understand what the builders knew, that permanence is not immortality, but a tension made solid. Some stones were built not to last, but to remember. And as mist curls through the gaps between them, the line between past and present blurs. The people who built these monuments are gone, but their silence remains. It hums through the air, through us, through everything that still listens. The stones stand as memory-embodied reminders that spirit once moved through matter, and perhaps still does. The narrator's voice fades with the wind. The stones remain, but the people change. Civilization is rising, and with it, a new kind of memory, one carved not in rock or rhythm, but in order. The sacred pulse will become structure, and the whisper of spirit will learn the language of cities. We traded the wind for the wheel. The hum began softly like a whisper mistaken for promise. At first, it was the rhythm of invention, the pulse of cleverness shaping matter into motion. Smoke rose not from fires of prayer or warmth, but from engines. The earth, once alive with bird call and breath, began to murmur differently. The new sound was steady, efficient, tireless. It came from the hands of those who believed they were improving the world, unaware that they were also tuning it to a new and unfamiliar frequency. The narrator's voice glides through the grey dawn of this change. The world that once echoed with hoofbeats and rivers now throbbed with the turning of wheels, the hiss of steam, the clatter of iron. Factories bloomed where fields had slept, their chimneys piercing the sky like monuments to restlessness. The hum of progress grew constant, weaving itself into every hour, until silence became the rarest sound of all. The body, once attuned to the quiet rhythms of wind and heartbeat, had to learn to live inside a noise that never ended. In the beginning, that noise felt like triumph. The machines sang of abundance, of mastery. Night was no longer darkness, but extension work could continue beneath lamps that mimicked the Sunday. The city became a constellation of its own making, a galaxy of flickering windows and ceaseless motion. People looked upward less often. The stars were harder to see, and few noticed. The hum was intoxicating, the proof of human genius echoing through the veins of every street. It was progress. They said the new heartbeat of civilization. But progress hums differently than life. It has rhythm, but no pulse. Its sound fills space but erases presence. The narrator pauses, letting the silence between words feel heavier than before. The old harmony, the one between footstep and soil, between breath and breeze, began to fade. People no longer walked to arrive. They walked to keep pace. The wheel turned faster, and time bent around it. The body, still ancient at its core, struggled to match the tempo. Factories replaced forests, but even more quietly, stillness was replaced by purpose. The night, once sacred, became merely an interval between tasks. Villages expanded into cities, and the air filled with motion, engines, gears, footsteps, and the restless sigh of humanity in pursuit of more. To pause became guilt, to listen, a kind of rebellion. The hum was everywhere inside, walls, beneath streets, behind thoughts. And though it promised connection, it delivered distance. Yet the narrator does not speak with blame. There is no condemnation here, only the soft ache of nostalgia. For even within this age of noise, there was wonder. The first lights glowing in the dark looked like miracles. The sound of locomotives in the distance carried the thrill of possibility. Humanity was growing, dreaming, building. It was simply forgetting how to hear itself in the process. The people of this new world began to move differently. Their hearts kept pace with clocks instead of seasons. They rose not with sunlight, but with schedules. The old instincts, the ones that once whispered when to plant, when to rest, when to move, were replaced by orders, timetables, and bells. The hum of machines became the new lullaby. Children fell asleep to it. Adults woke by it. And though it seemed like progress, a quiet loss crept through the cracks. The loss of wonder in small sounds, the loss of intimacy with silence. The narrator invites the listener to imagine standing at the edge of an early city, smoke rising, gears turning, the faint shimmer of soot in the morning light. The wind still blows, but its voice is faint. Beneath the industrial hum, a question lingers, unanswered. What happens to the soul when the world no longer pauses? The mind grows sharper, the hands busier, but the inner compass grows faint, as if drowned beneath the mechanical tide. There were those who noticed, poets, wanderers, dreamers. They stood at the edge of progress and listened for the wind they remembered. Some tried to paint it, some tried to write it, but the hum swallowed their voices too. The new world moved forward, unstoppable, glowing with brilliance and exhaustion. Humanity had conquered distance but lost nearness. It had gained control but surrendered calm. And yet, even in the thickest noise, the old pulse never vanished entirely. In the spaces between engines, in the breath before dawn, the earth still hummed its older tune. The wind still sought cracks between buildings. The body, even inside machines, still longed for rhythm. Sometimes, in moments of fatigue, people would pause, lean against a window, close their eyes, and feel it faintly again. The forgotten heartbeat, steady, patient, waiting beneath the hum. The narrator's voice lowers, almost prayerful now. Progress was not the enemy. It was the echo of our own desire to survive more beautifully. But survival, without silence, becomes endurance. The hum that once promised unity has become the wall between us and the listening world. We built machines that mimic the pulse of life, but in doing so, we forgot to feel it. We traded the wind for the wheel, the song for the system, the pause for the perpetual. And now, when night falls and the city hums like a vast and sleepless organism, there are still those who stand at the window, eyes closed, hearing the faintest echo beneath it all. A heartbeat, ancient, fragile, unchanged. The narrator lingers there, letting the hum fade until only that pulse remains. For silence, though buried, still breathes beneath the noise. And the world, tired but listening, waits to remember it again. Our bodies stopped starving. Our souls began. When the great machines fed the cities and the fields overflowed, humanity expected peace. Hunger, the ancient shadow that had followed us through every age, was finally banished. Yet in its absence, something more subtle began to ache. Bellies were full, but hearts grew hollow. The feast brought silence, the strange quiet of satisfaction that should have been joy but somehow wasn't. The old instincts, once devoted to survival, woke restless within comfort, unsure of their new purpose. The narrator's voice drifts like smoke through the glow of this modern abundance. It speaks gently, not accusing, only wondering, what happens when a species designed for need finds itself surrounded by plenty? The hands that once built fires now scroll through light. The minds that once tracked storms now wander through noise. Survival has become convenience, and yet the pulse beneath it all still hungers for what? No one can say exactly. It is not for food or safety, but for a reason to feel alive inside both. The body remembers struggle as harmony. Each ache once had meaning. The chase, the cold, the moment the fire caught. Now the aches are dull, misplaced anxieties without names. The same instincts that once kept the tribe alive now search for something to believe in. They reach for screens, for rituals of consumption, for anything that mimics the rhythm of purpose. We were not built for abundance. We were built for balance. And in forgetting that, we mistook comfort for completion. The hunger that returned was not visible. It crept through dreams, through the pauses between achievements. It whispered during long commutes, during sleepless nights, during quiet moments when success felt strangely hollow. People began to feel the absence of what could not be named. They had conquered hunger of the flesh, but the deeper hunger, the one for belonging, for awe, for silence, that means something remained unsatisfied. Progress had filled the world, but emptied the heart. The narrator's tone becomes softer still, like a confession from time itself. Even the earth seemed to mirror this imbalance. Rivers swelled, skies darkened, seasons stumbled out of rhythm. The world, too, appeared overfed, yet undernourished, abundant but uneasy. It was as though humanity's fullness had tipped the scales of nature, teaching the soil and sky our same restless craving. The abundance we built was real, but so was the void it revealed. This was not punishment, only reflection. For every age invents its own famine. When food runs out, we learn patience. When meaning runs out, we learn how to remember. Beneath the hum of the modern world, something ancient begins to stir. A quiet pull toward what was once sacred, once simple. The pulse that guided us through the dark still beats within us, but faintly, waiting to be rediscovered. The hunger is not for more, but for return. The narrator imagines this return not as escape, but as listening. Somewhere between heartbeat and breath lies the echo of the old hunger, still pure, still kind. It does not ask for possession or proof. It asks for presence, for the stillness we've forgotten how to hold. To stand beneath the stars without photographing them. To eat without distraction. To rest without guilt. The instincts have not vanished. They have simply changed their diet. What once fed on berries and flame now feeds on quiet and meaning. And yet, there is beauty in this longing. It means the human story is not finished. The hunger that returned is the same spark that once taught us to build, to sing, to pray. It is not emptiness, it is invitation. The soul's reminder that existence is not enough, it must also be felt. The ache itself is evidence that something within us still listens for the rhythm of the world, still remembers that we belong to it. The narrator pauses, letting silence do what words cannot. The listener can almost hear the echo of breath, slow, steady, like wind moving through a long-forgotten forest. The body, though surrounded by comfort, still yearns for the wilderness that shaped it. It wants to move, to feel, to be part of something larger than survival. Perhaps that is what modern hunger truly is. Not lack, but distance. Not emptiness, but exile from what we once knew so easily. Our bodies stopped starving. Our souls began. And in that paradox lies both our sorrow and our salvation. For hunger, in its truest form, has always been the teacher. It reminds us to seek, to reach, to remember. One day, when the hum quiets and the screens dim, we will hear it again. The soft growl of spirit, asking not for more, but for meaning. And from that hunger, memory will awaken the call of what lies buried beneath comfort, the forgotten rhythm of life that still waits patiently to be heard. The past is not behind us, it sleeps beneath our skin. Every heartbeat carries its echo, every breath a faint remembrance of when life was slower, gentler, whole. The more the world turns toward brightness and speed, the more the human spirit dreams of dusk, of quiet fires, of open skies, of belonging without demand. This longing is not nostalgia, it is instinct remembering itself. We are not reaching backward, but inward to the place where the oldest piece still hums. The narrator's voice is calm, like wind through reeds. It speaks of how art, meditation, and memory have become our new migrations, the ways we travel without moving. When the body cannot return to the forest, the mind builds one. A melody becomes a meadow. A painting becomes light through leaves. Even a single breath, when taken with awareness, can feel like touching the old world again. These are the quiet rebellions of modern souls, the refusal to forget what still lives within them. At night, when the noise fades and the screens dim, this dream grows stronger. People close their eyes and find themselves in ancient places, walking barefoot on cool earth, hearing rivers, sensing the slow rhythm that once guided everything. The body remembers what stillness felt like, not emptiness, but connection. The ancestors spoke through flame and soil. Now, we listen through silence and art. The forms have changed, but the yearning has not. It is the same call to belong to something vast, wordless, and alive. The narrator pauses, describing a painter alone in a studio, tracing the curve of a hill seen only in imagination. A musician draws from a drum, a rhythm that no city taught. A monk breathes in rhythm with his pulse, hearing in it the echo of 1,000 forgotten rituals. Each, in their own way, is building a bridge across time. The dream of return is not about undoing progress. It is about remembering how to be whole within it. We mistake it sometimes for sadness, this yearning, but it is not grief. It is guidance. The same force that once drove migrations now stirs within, urging us to return to balance. The ancestors followed rivers. We follow the current of reflection. Their journeys were physical, ours are spiritual. Yet both seek the same destination, harmony between the world and the self. Stillness has become the new wilderness. In it, we rediscover the landscape of the soul, unmeasured, untamed, endlessly patient. Meditation is not an escape from life, it is its remembering. When the breath slows, the mind softens, and time folds inward, the ancient world flickers back into being. The heart, rhythmic and unhurried, becomes the drum again. The body becomes the earth again. And for a moment, everything returns. The narrator's tone becomes a whisper now, gentle as twilight. Humanity, after so many ages of building outward, begins to build inward cathedrals of calm, temples of thought, sanctuaries of silence. Art replaces altar. Breath replaces sacrifice. The divine is no longer a figure in the sky, but a feeling beneath the ribs, the sacred pulse rediscovered within. In this way, the dream of return is already coming true. Every act of reflection, every moment of gratitude, is a step back toward the original rhythm. Perhaps this is what all creation has been leading to, not progress or power, but remembrance. For what we call evolution may simply be the long way home. Even as we soar through technologies and towers, we remain creatures of soil and silence. Our progress has never erased our origins. It has only buried them beneath invention. And now, as the noise grows unbearable, the buried pulse begins to rise again, steady, ancient, forgiving. The past is not behind us, it sleeps beneath our skin. When we paint, when we sing, when we breathe with intention, we wake it gently. The dream of return is not about time, but about tone, the frequency of harmony rediscovered in a dissonant world. The forest no longer surrounds us, yet it still breathes through us. The ancestors no longer walk beside us, yet they still whisper through memory and instinct. We have not lost them. We have only forgotten how to listen. The narrator falls silent for a moment, as if listening too. Then, softly, the final image unfolds. Dawn breaking over a city still half asleep, the light touching windows and faces alike. For an instant, the world feels whole metal and sky, body and spirit, past and present all joined in one unspoken rhythm. And from that stillness, the story turns forward again, for the dream of return is only the beginning of what comes next. Humanity's search, at last, for balance. The soil never forgets the footsteps that shaped it. Beneath every road, beneath every root, the earth keeps its quiet archive layers of time pressed into patience. Long after names fade and buildings fall, the ground holds what we once were. Ashen seed, tool and bone, memory reduced to texture. To kneel upon it is to touch every century at once. The soil does not hurry, and it does not lie. It simply absorbs, transforms, and waits. In its silence, the story of life continues without end. The narrator's voice moves low and calm, as though spoken from the ground itself. The earth remembers everything not as history, but as rhythm. The seasons are its language. Every cycle of thaw and bloom, of falling leaf and frozen hush, is a word in an ancient conversation. The soil turns memory into nourishment, death into growth. It does not mourn what it loses, for nothing is ever truly lost. It only changes form. Even the dust of cities will one day crumble back into its patience. When the first humans walked barefoot through wet clay, they did not think of ownership, only contact. Each footprint was both presence and prayer, a meeting between body and world. That same clay still holds their impressions, however faint, beneath newer layers of time. Archaeologists may call it sediment, but the soul of it is remembrance. The soil knows where fires once burned, where hands once sowed, where rain once healed what was broken. It has watched every mistake and forgiven them all. The narrator pauses, letting the sound of imagined wind move through the silence. To listen to the soil is to learn humility. It grows nothing that it does not also consume. It accepts everything, the fallen leaf, the spilled blood, the forgotten seed, and weaves them into renewal. Its patience is not weakness, but wisdom. While humanity rushes toward tomorrow, the earth works in slow miracles. It has never stopped turning, never stopped breathing, never stopped forgiving us for forgetting it. Sometimes, in spring, when the first shoots pierce the thawing ground, you can almost feel that forgiveness rising green and tender, yet strong enough to break stone. The soil remembers every winter, and so it knows how to bloom. It does not resent the cold. It trusts that warmth will return. That trust is its secret, the quiet faith that allows life to begin again. If we too could hold such patience, perhaps we would suffer less from the illusion of endings. The narrator speaks of migrations of animals following paths their ancestors carved, of rivers cutting the same courses through ancient beds. Even when mountains shift and forests vanish, the pattern persists. The planet, it seems, keeps its own instinct, the same instinct we have tried to forget. Birds trace invisible routes across continents, guided by a memory older than thought. Seeds carried by the wind return to the same valleys, generation after generation. The earth remembers the way home, even when we do not. There is comfort in this endurance. When the world feels uncertain, when human noise drowns the old rhythms, the soil remains beneath it all unchanged in essence, unchanged in purpose. It still listens to rain, still drinks light through leaf and root. The pulse we once shared with it has not vanished. It only waits for us to slow enough to feel it again. Beneath pavement, beneath asphalt, beneath every monument to progress, the earth still breathes soft, patient, alive. The narrator's tone deepens, grounding itself further. Imagine standing barefoot after rain, the way the mud clings, the way it cools the skin. That sensation is a kind of remembering. The body recognizes what the mind denies, that we are not separate from the ground we stand on. Our blood mirrors its iron, our breath mirrors its air. When we die, it will not reject us. It will take us back gently, as it always has, turning our endings into beginnings once more. Even now, scientists speak of microbial life, of soil that heals itself, of ecosystems rebuilding when left alone. But long before science, the earth already knew. It has always been its own caretaker. To the soil, time is not linear but circular. What falls will rise again, what decays will bloom, what ends will feed what begins. The human heart aches for permanence, yet the ground beneath us thrives on return. Perhaps that is why standing still in nature feels like peace. It teaches us to move in circles again, not lines. The soil remembers every song sung above it, every dance that pressed its rhythm into dust. It carries the echo of drums, of hooves, of rain. It remembers laughter and mourning and silence. And though it cannot speak, it hums a low, endless vibration that only the quiet can hear. If you listen long enough, it begins to sound like breath. The planet breathing beneath your feet, unchanged, unwavering, infinite. The narrator softens, voice barely more than a murmur. The soil never forgets the footsteps that shaped it. It has seen humanity rise and falter, flourish and fade, yet it holds no resentment. Its memory is not punishment. It is promise that nothing truly leaves, that every fall returns to form, that renewal is written into the bones of existence. As dusk settles over the imagined fields, the story lingers there in the scent of earth after rain, in the feel of dust between fingers. The soil remembers, and in remembering, it teaches. It teaches that patience is power, that stillness is not death, but preparation. And as the listener breathes in this quiet knowing, the narrator begins to turn toward what comes next, how the earth's memory awakens, something sleeping in us, the echo of instinct, the modern rediscovery of belonging. The forest still grows in our reflections. Even here among glass towers, sirens and screens, something ancient stirs beneath the concrete. It moves quietly, like roots remembering their path through stone. The wild has not left us. It has only changed form. Every light that flickers on in the city is a modern campfire. Every crowded train a migrating herd. Every pulse of neon a reminder that rhythm never died. It simply learned to hum in steel and wire. The narrator's voice glides slowly through the noise, observing without judgment. Humanity built its walls to keep out wilderness, yet the wilderness found a way in through us. The instincts that once listened for rustling leaves now track the movement of crowds. The vigilance that once guarded against predators now guards inboxes and deadlines. Even the rituals of morning coffee, evening walks, and weekend escapes are echoes of the old cycles. Ways to remember pattern, to restore pulse. Beneath the surface of routine lies the same ancient need, to find balance between stillness and survival. In the quiet moments between commutes, the wild stirs again. A stranger pauses to watch sunlight reflect off a puddle. A gardener tends to a rooftop patch of soil. A jogger runs not for health, but to feel the wind press against their chest, to feel, if only briefly, like part of something unmeasured. The narrator speaks gently. The wild within cities does not roar. It breathes. It hides in gestures, in memory, in the body's quiet insistence that it still belongs to the earth. Even our machines echo the world that made us. The beat of engines mimics the drum. The flow of traffic mirrors the migration of rivers. Networks grow like roots, branching endlessly. We build circuits and call them systems, but they are only reflections of what nature has already mastered: connection, adaptation, renewal. Our creations are not departures from the wild. They are its continuations, shaped by human hands instead of wind. The city, seen from above, glows like a living organism, veins of light, pulsing, alive. The narrator pauses, almost wistful. Humanity did not lose its wildness. It only disguised it as order. Even in concrete, the old instincts whisper. We still gather around light. We still seek rhythm. We still mark our days by cycles of traffic, of work, of sleep. These repetitions, though mechanical, are attempts at meaning. Somewhere beneath the steel and glass, the animal heart still beats, asking the same question it always has: how do I belong? There are moments when the city remembers, when rain falls hard enough to drown its engines, when power fails and the stars return, when vines push through cracks and the air smells briefly of soil. In those moments, the wild reminds us that it never surrendered. It merely waited. It knows patience better than we ever did. The plants reclaim walls. The birds nest in rafters. Even the wind, funneled between towers, sings like it once did through trees. The wilderness has not been lost. It has learned to adapt to us as we once adapted to it. The narrator's voice slows, almost meditative. Perhaps the real wilderness now lives inside the part of us that longs for quiet, that hungers for sunlight, that feels peace in the sound of leaves even when played through headphones. Meditation is the new forest. Breath is the new fire. Each act of awareness becomes a way of returning, a small defiance against forgetting. When we slow our pace, when we look at clouds between skyscrapers, we are practicing remembrance, the same sacred art our ancestors performed beside rivers and flame. The forest still grows in our reflections. It grows in art, in music, in the simple wish to pause. It grows in rebellion against exhaustion, in kindness shared among strangers, in the soft defiance of those who still look up at the moon between buildings. The wild has changed shape but not spirit. It no longer surrounds us. It lives within us, waiting to be acknowledged, not restored. And as the narrator's voice fades, the hum of the city becomes the new heartbeat, steady, layered, alive. The listener realizes that the forest never vanished. It moved inside the pulse of human life, inside thought, inside memory. The wilderness does not end where the pavement begins. It continues wherever awareness blooms. The story turns gently toward what comes next, the moment when this quiet knowing becomes action, when the instinct once buried beneath machinery awakens fully. The rediscovery will not be about escape, but about remembering that even within walls and wires, we are still made of wind, water, and earth, and the wild, patient as ever, is still waiting for us to wake. To listen is to remember. Every age leaves behind a sound. The first was the crackle of fire, the second the hum of wheels. Now, in the twilight of noise, a new sound is rising silence. It is not the absence of sound, but its refinement, the quiet found between breaths, between thoughts, between the endless scroll of days. Humanity, weary of its own volume, has begun to turn inward again. The revolution is not loud. It moves softly, like grass reclaiming stone. The narrator's voice is slow, deliberate, each word unfolding like a calm wave. Around the world, people are learning once more to pause, to notice, to breathe, to feel without rushing to define. They call it mindfulness, meditation, slowness. But beneath these modern names lies something older, something remembered rather than invented. It is the same awareness that guided hunters through fog, the same stillness that allowed the first dreamers to hear the voice of fire. We are not learning to listen, we are remembering how. To listen is to remember that life does not speak in shouts. The earth communicates through subtleties, the soft change in air before rain, the tilt of light before evening, the tone of another's breathing beside us. These quiet languages have always existed, only our attention had drifted away. Now, as exhaustion ripples through a restless world, people are beginning to rediscover the sacred art of noticing. The mind, once addicted to speed, begins to crave stillness the way the body craves water. The narrator lingers, describing this new age not as invention but return. Humanity is beginning to hear itself again through music stripped to silence, through moments of shared quiet, through the ritual of simply sitting still. In meditation halls and bedrooms, on crowded trains and forest trails, people close their eyes and breathe. They listen to heartbeats, to echoes, to nothing at all. And in that nothing, they find everything that had been missing. For in stillness, memory awakens. The pulse beneath the ribs remembers its ancestors, the ones who waited through storms, who read the wind by ear, who trusted silence more than speech. Listening is how we bridge time. Each breath taken with attention is a thread connecting us to every living thing that has ever breathed before. In the quiet, separation dissolves. The self softens back into belonging. The narrator's tone grows almost like a lullaby, the rhythm of the voice becoming its own meditation. The listening age is not about retreat, it is about recognition. We are finally noticing the consequences of forgetting the fatigue of constant urgency, the ache of endless motion. And so, slowly, we begin to stop. We sit beneath windows instead of screens. We walk without destination. We listen, and the world begins to answer. Birds return to cities. Winds regain their voices. Even machines, when heard closely enough, carry a hum that feels alive. Everything, it seems, has been waiting for our attention. In this new slowness, kindness thrives. To listen deeply is to see others clearly, not as obstacles or mirrors, but as fellow travelers. The noise that once divided us begins to fade. In its place comes understanding, patience, and gentleness. We begin to sense, perhaps for the first time in centuries, that peace is not something we must build. It is something that reveals itself when we stop interrupting it. The narrator pauses, then whispers as if confiding a secret. The earth has always been speaking. We simply spoke too loudly to hear. In the quiet, we rediscover meaning not through accumulation, but through attention. The rush to fill every moment is giving way to the grace of letting moments fill us. Slowness is becoming wisdom. Listening is becoming strength. For insomniacs, for wanderers, for those lost in thought at midnight, this realization comes like comfort. The world no longer demands noise from them. It offers quiet instead. A place to rest inside awareness. The heartbeat that once raced with worry begins to slow. Breath steadies. Thoughts, once tangled, begin to align. Listening becomes medicine. It does not cure, but it soothes. It does not erase, but it forgives. The narrator's tone deepens into stillness. The listening age is not the end of progress, but its correction, a balancing of sound and silence, of movement and rest. Humanity is learning that survival was never just endurance. It was awareness. To hear the wind again, to feel the pulse again, to recognize life in every sound and silence that is the truest evolution. To listen is to remember. And what we remember, we can finally understand. That the future will not be built by noise, but by attention. The same attention that once helped us light the first fires, that taught us to dream, to imagine, to care. The world is speaking again, softly. The question now is simple. Will we listen long enough to hear what it's trying to tell us? The voice fades into quiet. No conclusion follows, only breath steady, slow, ancient. The sound of life listening back. Not all extinctions begin in the wild, some begin in the mind. The narrator's voice drifts like a slow tide, mournful but calm, carrying the weight of vanished worlds. Across the long memory of the earth, countless creatures have come and gone. Some were erased by ice, some by fire, some by time itself. Yet the most haunting losses are those that seem to echo within us, the ones that feel too familiar, as if we once shared their fate. To vanish, the narrator suggests, is not only to die, it is to forget what once made life sacred. Long before our cities rose, before our words found shape, the Neanderthals walked beneath the same stars. They lit fires, buried their dead, painted walls with ochre and ash. Their hands were steady, their eyes intelligent, their hearts perhaps not so different from ours. For thousands of years they lived alongside us, breathing the same air, shaping the same earth. Then, one winter or another, their fires went out. The forests closed over their footprints. Their songs, if they had them, fell silent. And yet, in the marrow of our bones, traces of them remain. The forgotten live inside the remembering. The narrator's tone softens, like wind moving through a hollow valley. Neanderthals were not the only ghosts of the past. The mammoths once thundered across frozen plains, vast, gentle giants, whose migrations followed rhythms older than language. The saber-toothed cats, the giant sloths, the towering elk, each was part of a world we will never truly see again. Their extinction was not a single moment, but a slow fading, a whisper lost between seasons. Ice melted, grass returned. The great beast did not. The earth moved on, but something in it and in us changed forever. Extinction is not absence alone. It is amnesia. Every lost species takes with it a way of being, a form of intelligence, a rhythm the planet no longer remembers. The mammoth knew patience, the wolf knew communion, the whale knew song. When they vanished, those languages dimmed in the world's vocabulary. The narrator wonders perhaps we do not inherit only their fossils, but their silence. Perhaps extinction leaves not emptiness, but echoes that never quite fade. And so the question arises, could forgetting be the beginning of extinction itself? The Neanderthals may have been clever, but maybe they forgot how to adapt. The mammoths may have been mighty, but perhaps they forgot how to change their path. The seeds of vanishing, the narrator suggests, are often planted in comfort, in repetition mistaken for safety. To forget the pulse of survival, to grow deaf to the rhythm of life, is to drift toward disappearance long before death arrives. The voice slows, reflective, as if watching the past from a distance. Humanity, too, forgets. We forget the feel of soil beneath our hands, the meaning of silence, the necessity of awe. We forget that we are animals, woven from the same elements as the ones we mourn. And yet, unlike the mammoth or the Neanderthal, we have the power to remember again, to choose remembrance as a form of survival. Our extinction, if it comes, will not be written in bone or ice, but in the loss of connection, the severing of memory from meaning. The narrator pauses, the silence almost reverent. The earth does not grieve as we do, it transforms. Forests reclaim bones, rivers erase tracks, mountains bury cities without malice. Extinction, from nature's view, is not tragedy but transition. The tragedy exists only for those who remember. To mourn is to keep something alive in thought. Perhaps this is our role, to be the memory of the forgotten, the mind of the living world. Through that remembrance, life continues. Every species lost becomes lesson, every echo a warning. The mammoth teaches impermanence, the Neanderthal kinship, the vanished bird fragility. Their silence calls to us, asking whether we will vanish as they did not, because we failed to survive, but because we failed to listen. Forgetting, after all, is a quiet extinction of spirit. When we no longer feel awe, when we no longer notice the turning of the world, when the ancient pulse no longer stirs beneath our noise, that is when the mind begins to fade from the living earth. And yet, the narrator's voice carries a faint warmth, not of hope, but of clarity. To remember is to resist disappearance. Each time we honor what has passed, we weave ourselves back into the long continuum of being. Every act of care for a tree, a memory, a song keeps the thread from breaking. The world may lose bodies, but it need not lose meaning. Even in the absence of the mammoth, the tundra still blooms. Even without Neanderthals, the fire still burns. Life remembers itself through renewal. The narrator turns contemplative, almost prayerful. Extinction, then, is not an ending but a mirror. It shows us the cost of forgetting and the beauty of remembrance. We mourn not because the world is fragile, but because it is eternal. Every death returns to the soil. Every silence becomes seed. The ones who came before are not gone, they are translated. Their essence moves through rivers, through trees, through us. To remember them is to feel the pulse of evolution inside our own hands. Not all extinctions begin in the wild, some begin in the mind. But as long as we remember, as long as we still kneel to wonder, we remain part of the living story. The narrator's voice fades into stillness, the tone neither sad nor triumphant, only steady, like the rhythm of the earth continuing. The lesson waits there, unspoken yet understood. Memory is not what keeps the past alive. It is what keeps us from joining it too soon. The silence of the extinct is still speaking. It speaks not in words, but in balance, in the way a forest regrows after fire, in the pause between waves, in the soft patience of things that no longer rush. The narrator's voice begins as a whisper, reverent and slow. What we call extinction, it says, might be another form of teaching. Those who are gone left behind not only bones but blueprints, not only fossils, but philosophies written in the shape of how they lived. Each vanished being carried a wisdom we were meant to remember. The mammoths knew the art of endurance. They did not fight the cold, they walked with it. Their migrations followed the rhythm of the earth's breath, retreating when it froze, returning when it thawed. They taught resilience without rebellion, movement without conquest. The great cats, the dire wolves, the herds that thundered across plains, they all lived by the same quiet law. Take what you need, leave enough for return. It was not morality. It was mathematics of survival, a balance we once understood before abundance made us careless. The narrator lingers on the Neanderthals, our almost selves. They carried empathy in their bones. They cared for the weak, buried their dead, crafted tools not just for utility but for beauty. In their brief existence, they revealed that intelligence without tenderness is incomplete. When they vanished, the world lost a mirror that showed humanity's gentler face. Yet traces of their DNA remain in ours, a whisper that compassion once walked beside us and might again. Their extinction did not erase their lesson, it inscribed it deeper into our blood. Even smaller lives, now lost, carried messages we have not yet learned to read. The bees that once hummed through ancient fields, the birds that vanished when forests fell silent, they taught collaboration, rhythm, interdependence. They knew that no species stands alone. Their disappearance warns us that silence, however peaceful it may seem, can also be a warning note, the sound of a system forgetting how to sing together. The narrator pauses, the tone soft as ash. Extinction, viewed closely, is not only tragedy, it is translation. Each loss turns into language, the language of caution, of humility, of perspective. The wisdom of the vanished is not about despair, but about proportion. They remind us that life is temporary, not to frighten us, but to guide us toward reverence. The world does not mourn in human terms. It transforms. The fallen tree becomes soil. The silence of the extinct becomes the earth's quiet insistence that everything is connected. From this silence comes a question. What if survival is not dominance, but memory? Every creature that lived before us carried a fragment of understanding of temperature, of migration, of cooperation. Humanity's greatest strength was never invention, but remembrance, the ability to learn not only from what thrives, but from what no longer does. To listen to extinction is to receive the final wisdom of those who endured as long as they could. The narrator's voice deepens, almost prayerful. Imagine if the mammoth could speak now. It would tell us not to fear the cold, but to move with it. If the dodo could whisper, it might remind us that curiosity can be dangerous when stripped of care. If the Neanderthal could dream through us, it would tell us that survival without empathy is only half living. These are not myths, they are moral equations written into the fabric of the planet, waiting for us to read them again. There is beauty in this listening, for as the world changes, we become the inheritors of the silence left behind. Every breath we take carries particles once exhaled by the extinct. Every step presses the ground once shaped by their bodies. Their wisdom is not gone. It circulates through air, through water, through us. We are living archives of everything that came before. Forgetting that is the true extinction. Remembering it is the continuation of life's great conversation. The narrator pauses again, then speaks more softly still. Extinction humbles us. It reminds us that no species, however clever, exists outside the web. That intelligence without reverence becomes ruin. That we are temporary guests in an eternal house. The wisdom of the vanished is simple. Do not mistake survival for supremacy. The earth will endure. The question is whether we will learn to live gently enough to endure with it. The silence of the extinct is still speaking. It speaks through shifting weather, through returning animals, through the strange ache we feel when standing among ruins. It calls us not to despair, but to awareness. For extinction's greatest lesson is not loss, it is attention. To notice the fragility of things is to begin to protect them. To mourn is to care. To listen is to live differently. As the narrator's voice fades, the silence that follows feels alive like breath before revelation. What has vanished does not vanish completely. It becomes the wisdom that guides what survives. And from that remembrance, the story will turn one final time toward hope, and toward the quiet possibility that what we learn from loss may still save us. We stand on the same edge our ancestors once escaped. The horizon glows not with sunrise, but with the dim shimmer of uncertainty, a threshold both beautiful and trembling. The narrator's voice drifts gently, like light across water. There is no panic here, only the quiet ache of awareness. Every age has faced its brink, yet this one feels different, not carved by spears or storms, but by our own reflection. The tools that once saved us now hum too loudly to hear the earth's reply. The question is no longer whether we will survive, but whether we will remember what survival means. The narrator moves slowly through images of the present world, the blue glow of screens, the hum of endless data, the fragile breath of forests thinned to whispers. Our cleverness stretches farther than our sight. We build machines that think, but forget how to feel. We travel through the sky, but lose the scent of rain. The planet still turns, patient and forgiving, yet its rhythm falters where we have walked too carelessly. Rivers run faster, seasons stumble, and the soil, though still generous, grows tired. It is not vengeance. It is fatigue, the sigh of an old friend waiting for us to listen again. The narrator speaks softly, the tone more like prayer than warning. Humanity has always stood on edges. We stood there when the glaciers melted. We stood there when fire was new. We stood there when kingdoms fell into dust. Each time, we looked into the abyss and called it progress. And each time, the world gave us another chance. Perhaps that is what makes this moment sacred, that we are not being punished, only reminded. The earth is not ending, it is speaking. The danger is not in the storm outside, but in the silence within. Technology, in its brilliance, has given us miracles, voices across oceans, cures once unthinkable, glimpses of galaxies. Yet it has also built a cage of connection too constant to be real. We scroll through infinity, but touch less. We know everything, but understand little. The narrator does not scold, it only observes, tenderly. This is not the fall of humanity, but it's forgetting the slow drift away from presence into simulation. We have surrounded ourselves with echoes and mistaken them for songs. The ecological wounds mirror our own disquiet. The melting ice, the restless storms, the burning forests. They are not simply events but expressions of imbalance. The planet mirrors the species that walks upon it, creative, powerful, restless, and afraid of stillness. The narrator pauses, then whispers. We call it climate, but it is also memory, the temperature of our relationship with the world. The air remembers our excess, the water our neglect. Yet, astonishingly, both still offer forgiveness. Life remains abundant, eager to heal, if only given space. There is hope hidden in this fragility. The same species that invented the machine can also rediscover the seed. The same mind that split the atom can mend the soil. Beneath the noise, the old instincts still stir to nurture, to listen, to restore. All it requires is slowness, the humility to begin again. Progress was never meant to be escape. It was meant to be understanding. The horizon has always been both danger and invitation, asking the same question our ancestors once faced. Can you evolve without forgetting who you are? The narrator's tone lowers further, becoming almost a lullaby. The edge does not have to mean ending. Sometimes it means awakening the delicate balance between fear and faith. The horizon is fragile because it is alive. It trembles beneath our weight, but also under our potential. We are the only species that can see the future and still choose differently. The power that endangers us is the same power that could redeem us, the ability to imagine, to remember, to care. The listener can almost feel the quiet heartbeat of the earth beneath the words. The planet, though wounded, is not dying. It is waiting for attention, waiting for gratitude, waiting for the moment when our machines pause and our hands reach once more for the living world. The narrator reminds us that fragility is not weakness, it is sensitivity, the capacity to feel change before it becomes loss. That is how all life survives, by listening to tremors before they become quakes, by sensing imbalance before collapse. We stand on the same edge our ancestors once escaped, though the abyss looks different now. It is not made of cold or hunger, but of forgetting our dependence, our tenderness, our shared pulse with the world. Yet even on this edge, there is beauty. The horizon still glows with possibility, soft and uncertain, like dawn remembering itself. And as the voice fades, the listener feels not despair, but calm, the stillness that comes from seeing clearly. The edge becomes less a warning, more a mirror, reflecting both peril and grace. The world is fragile, yes, but so is every miracle. Survival, the narrator whispers, was never just about strength. It was about care for each other, for the earth, for the memory that binds them. The fragile horizon gleams before us, trembling but alive, inviting us once more to remember before we take the next step. To survive again, we must remember how to feel. Not with the hurried senses dulled by noise, nor with the restless mind chasing meaning, but with the ancient awareness that once lived beneath thought, the kind that listened to wind before it spoke, that trusted warmth before it had a name. The narrator's voice glides softly, like breath through candlelight. Humanity, it says, is beginning to relearn what it once knew without question. How to exist, not as conquerors, but as participants, not as thinkers, apart from the world, but as beings woven into its rhythm. The world is slowing, even if we do not yet recognize it. Beneath the rush of data and traffic, something gentler is awakening, a quiet return to presence. People are seeking stillness in meditation, simplicity in movement, truth in silence. The narrator does not speak of trend or ritual, but of instinct reawakening through necessity. It is as though the species, exhausted by its own acceleration, has begun to crave the pulse it once ignored. To pause is no longer weakness, it is survival's new form. The body remembers how to listen, and in that listening, begins to heal. This relearning begins in the smallest of gestures. The act of breathing becomes a ceremony. The warmth of sunlight through a window becomes an inheritance. The sound of rain returns as comfort, not inconvenience. These are not sentimental rediscoveries, they are acts of remembering the world as teacher. Each quiet moment is a lesson the ancestors once mastered. To be still enough to notice, to care enough to feel. Awareness, the narrator suggests, is not new wisdom. It is old instinct remembering its name. The tone deepens, like the hush of a forest at dusk. Once, long ago, survival depended on sensitivity. The tremor of air, the scent of rain, the flicker of shadow. Then came the centuries of forgetting, when reason grew louder than rhythm. But reason, though useful, cannot love. It can only measure. And so the new survival, the quiet relearning, asks us to feel again what measurement cannot describe. Empathy, wonder, gratitude. These are not luxuries, they are instincts waiting to be remembered. To relearn how to feel is to restore language between body and world. The hands that type can still touch, bark and soil. The eyes that stare at glass can still find peace in the horizon. The mind that fears stillness can still find its reflection in the steady pulse of breath. Every moment of reconnection begins within, not through escape, but through attention. The narrator's voice becomes gentler, almost instructive. Be still long enough, and the world will begin to speak again. Not loudly, but kindly. This quiet movement is spreading through artists who create without hurry, through parents teaching their children to watch clouds, through strangers who pause to help, through those who choose care over speed. These are the new tribes of the modern age, not bound by territory, but by tenderness. They carry no banners, no manifestos, only a shared intuition that something sacred has been misplaced, and that it can be found again not in discovery, but in remembering. The narrator pauses, letting a long silence rest like breath between thoughts. The relearning is not only about nature, but about one another. Empathy, too, is an instinct that must be reclaimed. Once, it bound tribes together through shared survival, the understanding that every life, even the smallest, carried weight. Today, empathy has grown thin beneath the strain of distance and distraction. Yet even now, it stirs. In moments of quiet honesty, when we comfort a stranger, when we listen without defense, when we forgive without reason, we are relearning what it means to be human. The modern world, for all its brilliance, has not erased our instincts. It has only hidden them beneath layers of forgetting. The heart still knows when something is true. The body still tenses when danger nears, softens when kindness arrives. The pulse still quickens at beauty, still steadies at belonging. This quiet relearning is the process of trusting those signals again, not as superstition, but as wisdom. The narrator likens it to finding a lost language written not in words, but in sensations. The vocabulary of intuition, patience, care. The relearning, the voice continues, is not loud because truth seldom needs to be. It grows like moss, quietly reclaiming what was once stone. It spreads in whispers, in gentle refusals, the refusal to hurry, to numb, to forget. It is not rebellion against progress, but reconciliation with presence. It asks nothing impossible, only that we return to noticing the taste of air, the weight of silence, the miracle of being alive when the world could so easily have gone on without us. To survive again, we must remember how to feel not just with the heart, but with the whole being. The world has never stopped speaking. It is our listening that faltered. The quiet relearning is the act of turning toward that voice again, of meeting life where it stands, unguarded and real. It is the return of sensitivity as strength, of stillness as action, of empathy as evolution. The species that forgot begins, softly, to remember. The narrator's final words fade into warmth. This is not the end of the story, but the return to its beginning, to the time when feeling was enough to survive, and listening was enough to belong. And from this quiet relearning will come the next awakening, the reconnection not only with the world, but with one another, the rediscovery of the shared heartbeat that has never stopped waiting beneath the noise. The story that began in fire ends in warmth. The narrator's voice is a soft glow now, slow and steady, like breath beside a dying flame. The journey has come full circle from the first flicker in the darkness to this final quiet light. The same instinct that once gathered our ancestors around a fire still calls us toward one another, though now the flames are gentler. A candle on a table, a glow behind a screen, a heartbeat felt beside another's. Survival, it seems, was never just about endurance. It was about remembering the shape of togetherness, a circle that widens, breaks, and finds itself whole again. The narrator lingers in this stillness, painting with silence. The first fire burned not only for heat, but for belonging. Around it, strangers became kin, fear softened into story, and hunger turned into sharing. We built our lives upon that rhythm, the give and return, the call and the echo. The circle has never truly vanished. It has only grown harder to see. But tonight, in the quiet spaces between noise, we begin to feel it again. We are relearning what our ancestors always knew, that life, at its simplest, is the art of keeping one another warm. Fire once guarded us from the dark. Now, warmth guards us from forgetting. It lives not in flame alone, but in every small kindness the food shared, the patience offered, the silence held. These are the new fires, invisible but enduring. They pass from hand to hand, from voice to voice, and each time they are given, the circle strengthens. The narrator speaks softly, as though addressing the listener directly. You are part of that fire, whether you notice or not. Every act of gentleness keeps the first light alive. Outside, the world still hums, cities glowing like constellations, winds moving through forests, tides repeating their ancient song. But beneath it all, the same pulse continues, the rhythm that began when the first heart beat beside another. It is the rhythm of cooperation, of shared breath, of life refusing to be solitary. The circle does not close to exclude, it closes to embrace. Every species that ever thrived did so together. The lesson was never power, it was always connection. The narrator pauses, as if watching the embers fade to gold. Once, survival meant building walls, now it means dissolving them. We are learning that strength lies not in separation, but in surrender. The surrender to belonging, to vulnerability, to care. To live within the circle is to accept that we are made of each other, that one person's silence is another's peace, that one person's breath feeds another's flame. It is the humility our ancestors practiced without words, and the wisdom we are just beginning to remember. The voice lowers, near whisper now. The circle is not a symbol, it says. It is the shape of life itself. Everything returns. Ash becomes soil, soil becomes seed. Seed becomes breath. Nothing is wasted, nothing is gone. The universe has been practicing this art since the first spark. We are its continuation, the same story told in new bodies. The warmth we share is the same warmth that once rose from the first fires on the plains, the same glow reflected in the eyes of those who sat together, afraid yet unbroken, beneath the stars. Perhaps that is the truest meaning of survival. Not victory, not progress, but return. We have crossed millennia of forgetting to rediscover what was always waiting, that the world does not belong to us, and we do not stand apart from it. We belong to each other, and to the great rhythm that connects soil to sky, memory to dream, fire to warmth. The circle does not end, because it was never linear. It turns, endlessly, gently, through everything that lives and remembers. The narrator's voice slows to a hush, the words almost melting into silence. In the flicker of this imagined firelight, humanity's long story seems small and tender, a brief warmth in the vastness of time. Yet that warmth is everything. It is meaning itself. It is love made into endurance. Around it, the listener can almost see the shadows of those who came before: hunters, healers, mothers, dreamers, all sitting quietly, as if waiting for the story to end. But the story does not end. It only softens. The circle restored is not a return to the past, but a remembering of harmony. The instincts we thought we lost, trust, care, awareness, were never gone. They were buried beneath the noise, waiting for stillness to uncover them. And now, as the fire burns low, the narrator's voice fades with peace rather than sorrow. The warmth remains. It always will. As long as there is breath, there is belonging. The story that began in fire ends in warmth, not as an ending, but as continuation. The circle holds, the pulse endures, and the night listens quietly as the ancient rhythm breathes once more. Every dream you've ever had is older than you think. The narrator's voice is almost a whisper now, soft as breath against the dark, a sound that feels more like memory than speech. The story has come to rest, though not to end. The long journey through fire, fear, silence, and rediscovery folds back into itself like a sigh. What began as survival has become remembrance, and what seemed forgotten is simply asleep, waiting for the world to grow quiet enough to wake it again. There is a memory that lives beneath the pulse, older than thought, older than language, older even than time measured by the stars. It hums softly in every living thing. The trees hear it in wind. The whales carry it in song. The earth itself breathes to its rhythm. We call it instinct, or intuition, or soul, but it is simpler than all of those. It is the gentle remembering that life, in all its forms, is one continuous breath inhaled and exhaled across centuries. The narrator moves slowly, each phrase a lull. It tells us that nothing we have lost is truly gone. The instincts that once guided the first humans still live in our bones. The way the skin prickles before a storm, the way calm arrives when someone's hand finds ours, the way awe still silences the mind when light touches water. These are not accidents. They are inheritances. Beneath every gesture, every heartbeat, the past still stirs, patient, enduring, kind. Sometimes it returns in dreams. The sleeper walking through a forest that no longer exists, the sound of a sea never seen, the smell of smoke without a fire, These are the old signals, still speaking. The body remembers what the world forgets. Dreams are not escape, they are conversation. When the conscious mind quiets, the ancient one awakens, whispering in images, in echoes. It reminds us that we were never separate from the earth, that our stories are the earth retelling itself through us. The narrator pauses, and the silence feels full, a presence more than an absence. Even now, in this age of hum and light, the memory sleeps beneath the noise, unchanged. It does not resent our forgetting. It knows that remembering always returns. The instinct to listen, to care, to belong, these are not lost. They are resting. They wait for stillness, for the hush that falls after exhaustion, for the single deep breath that begins the healing. The quiet we fear is the very place where memory begins again. Every generation believes it stands at the end of something, yet the earth has seen countless endings and always calls them seasons. The narrator speaks softly, like someone tending a flame. What sleeps in you is not weakness. It is the oldest strength, the patience of roots, the endurance of wind, the kindness that kept the first fires burning. The memory does not need to be taught. It only needs to be trusted. As the world spins and brightens and hums, small awakenings begin to shimmer everywhere. A mother teaching her child to look at the moon, a stranger pausing to watch rain, a hand choosing to comfort instead of ignore. Each of these is a spark in the dark, proof that the circle still glows beneath the surface. The instincts awaken gently, never all at once. They return through tenderness, through wonder, through the still miracle of being alive and knowing it. The narrator's tone slows even further, each word cradled by silence. The listener is invited to imagine the body as a vessel of continuity, carrying the dust of stars, the breath of forests, the memory of hands long turned to earth. Every cell is a story. Every dream is an echo. The life you are living now is part of something that has never stopped living. There is no true forgetting, only pauses between remembering. The ancient pulse continues through us unchanged, unhurried, infinite. It beats when we love, when we rest, when we surrender to sleep. It is the same rhythm that guided the hunters through fog, that stirred the oceans before the moon had a name. The same rhythm that will guide what comes after us, long after our own fires fade. In that continuity lies the gentlest truth. Nothing truly ends. It only transforms into another way of remembering. The narrator's final words are almost inaudible, like the soft settling of ash. The memory that sleeps in us is not gone, it is dreaming. It dreams through your heartbeat, through your breath, through the quiet that comes before dawn. Listen to it. Trust it. It is older than fear, and stronger than time. The sound fades, leaving only stillness, the kind that feels alive, as though the world itself has leaned closer to breathe. The story dissolves into that silence, not as conclusion, but as continuation. The listener, resting now, carries the memory onward into sleep, into morning, into whatever comes next.